Good evening. My name is Nicholas Lamar Soutter, and welcome to In Time. Tonight, the rest of the world has at long last stared the American justice system in the face and recognized the brutality of how we treat a section of those among us. And they have said that they will no longer take it. In nearly a dozen cities across the globe, France, Germany, the UK, Netherlands, Canada, Ireland, Brazil, there have been protests in sympathy with the protests here in the United States. Tonight in the US, over 40 cities have imposed curfews, and more than 23 states have deployed the National Guard, including Washington, D.C. Active duty troops are presently being deployed to Washington, D.C., where less than an hour ago a peaceful protest near the White House was gassed and shot at with rubber bullets. In a teleconference between Donald Trump and state governors earlier, Donald Trump declared that most of the governors in this country are weak and said that they need to start arresting people and engage in, quote, total domination. He said that he introduced a great many people during this conference. One of them was General Mark Milley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who Trump said had, quote, many victories and no losses, and that he was putting the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, in charge. Trump said, quote, we have to get much tougher, and said that governors must seek, quote, retribution for violent acts. Quote, you don't have to be too careful, he said, and he said, most of you are weak. The world is laughing at Minneapolis. You have to dominate. If you are not dominating, you are wasting your time, and you look like a bunch of jerks. You have to arrest people, and they have to go to jail for long periods of time. This is a movement, and if you don't put it down, it gets worse. Like Occupy Wall Street, one day you have to say enough, and that's what happened. People went in and wiped them out. The key word is dominate. If you don't dominate your city and your state, people will walk away with you. And tonight in D.C., we're going to do something the people have never seen before. This appears to be his way of enacting the the Insurgency Act, which he is ostensibly going to use to get around posse comitatus. Posse comitatus, as we discussed prior, is the concept, well, in general, it is a concept of sheriffs being allowed to deputize other people to help them engage in police actions and to help them police the people when the sheriff is overwhelmed. But in this case, it refers to a constitutional concept that the U.S. military may not deploy on U.S. soil for police actions. Ironically, this is actually only the Army and the Navy. The Coast Guard is exempt from it. In general, it's not viewed to be. Customarily, it's a part of it. And the Space Force, being brand new, is also exempt from it. So I'm sure we're all going to see little green men with lasers running around trying to keep the peace. But the Insurgency Act was designed 213 years ago to quell civil unrest, insurgency, and rebellion. Again, those three things: civil unrest, insurgency, and rebellion. The question is, which does he think we're experiencing right now? It was last enacted during the 1992 Los Angeles riots. At that point, it was enacted against civil unrest. Tonight, Donald Trump seems to be suggesting that most of the people, not just in the riots, but in the protests, are terrorists and acting not only against the United States, but against God Himself. An initial draft of the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office, which we showed, I believe, 2 days ago, stated that George Floyd had died in principle as a result of complications resulting from intoxication, hypertension, and stress. That stress presumably being the fact that he was being arrested. It seemed to state that this was not a homicide and that this was an accidental death caused as a result of a pre-existing medical condition. This was a draft released by the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office. 3 hours ago, I'm sorry, more than that, earlier today, a private medical examiner hired by Floyd's family has reached the conclusion that the cause of death was in fact homicide, the result of chest and neck compressions, which resulted in cardiopulmonary arrest. This is to say that he suffocated as a result of being unable to breathe from the weight on his chest and neck, and that this caused his heart and lungs to fail. 3 hours after that report came out, the official report came out from the Hennepin County Medical Examiner's Office and reversed the position of the prior report, the draft, and seemed to concur with the private examination, stating that while he did have fentanyl and methamphetamines in his system, the cause of death was in fact homicide. This allows the prosecution of the officer to go forward, and just I will interrupt. What you're seeing here now is a number of the the countries and cities that I listed. This is London, the U.S. Embassy in London. All of this is within the last 4 to 6 hours. Dublin, Ireland, you see here. We have been watching for the last 6 nights now the growing protests across the United States and now across the world. Started in Minneapolis, Minnesota, 1 city. Next day it was 4. Next day after that it was 30. Now it's over 40 and across a dozen countries. This is what happens when people are shocked by the brutality they see, and the world has been shocked by the brutality they've been watching on social media and on television, the brutality of our police and military as they engage in what now appears to be the targeted assault of journalists. We're going to get into that. We've seen a number of cases where journalists in the middle of reporting with cameras and lights, clear of any protesters, often in completely empty streets, are targeted, oftentimes wearing vests that identify themselves as journalists and or having already given their credentials to police officers, targeted, pepper sprayed, attacked, hit with rubber bullets, and or in one case that we discussed last night, a CNN crew attacked with multiple canisters of smoke grenades and what appears to have been tear gas. There have been a number of arrests, and a number of suspensions and firings of police departments in police departments across the country as a result of this. We showed one incident a few nights ago of a man who was arrested, pulled out of his car. He had both hands up behind his back, up behind his head like this. He was in the process of being arrested when one officer went. The man was doing nothing. He was not resisting. He was in the process of being arrested. One officer went about 10 to 15 feet behind him, ran towards him, jumped up, and kicked him in the back with a flying kick. The man bounced off the car in front of him, and as he was trying to get his footing, this was either seen as an attack by the other officer, or I don't know, but the two officers worked together to bring him to the ground and arrest him. He was arrested for resisting arrest and an outstanding warrant, despite the fact that he had been complying at the time. Those two men have been fired. 2 more who were there at the time have been suspended. Multiple officers have been suspended or fired as a result of excessive force. Many more we have seen doing excessive force, and we were able to confirm, in fact, that the macing that we saw last night, which we had been told was by a police officer, and we saw a hand of someone who clearly was not a police officer. They were holding a water bottle. That water bottle was a first aid. We were able to identify that it was, in fact, a police officer who maced a 8-year-old black girl. She was sitting there. Her parents were holding her. He walked up, applied the mace directly into her eyes, and walked away. We also have here seen some incredible acts of kindness and our shared humanity, including police officers talking with the communities that they police. Many of them immigrants, minorities themselves, who police the communities because these are their people and they love them. And we have seen the chief of police in Houston walk with protesters. We have seen and showed last night many instances of police officers taking a knee in solidarity with the protesters, even holding up signs with and protesting with the protesters. But the question is, what happens when it becomes violent? We have a problem now, which is we have a president who, it appears, is incapable of understanding nuance and is incapable of understanding anything but projecting a position of strength and authority at all costs. He came out today and suggested that he would be enacting the Insurgency Act, and that all governors had this one chance to get their states under control, and if they didn't, he would do it for them. In our view, this is a violation of the Insurgency Act, which states that the governors must request the presidential aid in order to have the military arrive and engage on their behalf. Nonetheless, he seems to be suggesting that he is tired of seeing this, and that it is in America's best interest that all of these be quelled immediately. And he suggested that as of tonight, he would be ending all of the protests. The military, we know from an article in The Nation, has been monitoring, apparently in violation, at least possibly in violation of posse comitatus, has been monitoring at least 7 states for activity and tracking the activity of the protesters and rioters, and now may be using that information in order to coordinate their activities for the next step. President Trump has been apparently incensed by the burning of a church opposite the White House and by what appears to be a fire that was set in the White House, we believe it was the Northwest Gatehouse, and certainly having to spend most of the night in a bunker last night and the night before. We are going to play for you his declaration and a message that was secretly recorded with him speaking with multiple governors. It was released by PBS, where he told them that they would be required to end these or he would do it for them, and he introduced the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the new leader in the battle to gain control of this rioting. The solidarity that we're seeing in other countries across the world tonight is against violence, and I don't think any of them approve of the violence that we see here. But they understand it, and they understand that this is oppressed people and those who empathize with them standing up for what is right. I would like to suggest that a massive violent retaliation against these protesters, and in many genuine cases, these rioters, would be seen and overwhelmingly condemned by the rest of the world. Iran today, by the way, requesting that the United States treat its own civilians with dignity and stop using violence against them. This was Iran. Some of the footage that you're seeing here, and we'll cover it, what you're seeing right now is a black woman in Arkansas. She was kneeling and was kicked, and then once she was on the ground, body checked with a police officer jumping on top of her. So we're going to be keeping an eye on things. There is obviously a great deal going on. What we have is our biggest concern, and we are trying to discuss. We may actually try reaching out to Landon Knoll as well. He has been very helpful in a number of these matters. But one of our concerns at this point is that if Donald Trump declares these, we don't believe at this point he is going to. He has to make a declaration as to who these people are, and we're going to read the declaration that he has to make. He has to make actually a very specific declaration in order to activate the Insurgency Act. Let's see, he needs to declare the protesters either insurgents, rebels, or engaged in civil unrest. And he has to give them one final order to disperse or retire peaceably before he can deploy the military. We suspect he probably won't be doing that. Nonetheless, it seems like he may have had some subtle attempt at it earlier. It looks like what he is setting up right now is, and this is, I believe this is Los Angeles. It is California. I forget where this is. These are protesters who have been knocked back against a wall. They cannot climb the wall, so they are trapped and being gassed while they are incapable of retreating. They can't go forward because they're going literally into the police officers at that point. So they're trapped. We'll see some more footage in a little bit. Nonetheless, if these he has declared them ostensibly terrorists. That's what he said that they are. If they are terrorists, and if the U.S. military is deployed against them, if indeed it is done if they are considered to be enemy combatants, the number of rights which they have, even on U.S. soil, drop precipitously. They don't have the right to remain silent anymore. They don't have they don't get Mirandized before being arrested, and officers can shoot really immediately upon seeing them. Is this what Trump is planning? I haven't a clue. Nobody knows. But the rhetoric coming out of the White House is frightening. And the fact that he appears to be calling these terrorists and insurgents and engaged in some form of rebellion or insurgency against the United States is not comforting. And as I said, we will play some of the audio from his, he wants to deploy the U.S. military, yeah. So shortly after his speech or his discussion with the governors of various states in the United States, the chief of police, Houston chief of police, Art Cavado, I apologize for butchering that name, the same one who marched with protesters, said to Trump, quote, "On behalf of police chiefs across this country, please, if you don't have something constructive to say, keep your mouth shut." CNN Anderson Cooper has called out Donald Trump and said, "Who here is the thug?" And the Republican governor of Massachusetts has said that Trump is bitter, combative, and self-interested. Coessa, 5001. China is pretty much laughing its ass off right now, especially with Hong Kong. Yes, we have been distracted. This, by the way, is Denmark, as you can see here. This is a Black Lives Matter protest in Denmark in front of our embassy. This is Italy. China's laughing their asses off and have attacked us for our racism, which is somewhat easier for them to do because they're actually a pretty homogenous culture. So it's hard to know how racist they would be if they were not uh, so uniform themselves. But they do enjoy being able to make fun of us for those particular faults. This is Toronto. You see here moving towards the, and that's actually, it's hard to tell, but that's actually moving footage right there of Toronto, I believe, 6 hours ago. So yeah, of course, we are losing Hong Kong, which is quite significant, and China is laughing their asses off because we say we're about freedom, but we can't seem to manage without hurting ourselves, hurting each other, and then trying to figure out how to stop ourselves from doing it without violating that same freedom. Oh, oh boy. So that's a pretty large crowd in Toronto. So that's where we are. Once again, the National Guard has been deployed to, now that we are aware of, 23 states and the District of Columbia. The military, it appears, is being deployed as we speak to the District of Columbia. 40 cities are under curfew. A number of them, New York, which had previously said it would not do a curfew and that it would not deploy the National Guard, appears to be changing positions. That's New Zealand that we see there. Appears to be changing position and saying that they will now be enacting a strict curfew. Curfews in some states started as early as 2 p.m. and in other states are starting as late as 11 p.m. We're going to be covering what happens as those curfews begin. Of most interest, I think, right now is, again, Washington, D.C. Trump has promised swift and decisive action in Washington, D.C. That is Vancouver, that you see right there, also about 6 hours ago. Actually, that's closer to 10 hours ago. He has promised swift and decisive action. That's the Netherlands. Swift and decisive action against the protesters in D.C., which he has said will be a model for how to deal with them all across the United States. So, without any further ado, let's. I'd like to just start. I'd like to finish some of these videos. I believe that's also okay. That's the U.S. Embassy in London, outside the U.S. Embassy in London today. What I'd like to do is we will, in just a minute, we will pause this and listen to the phone call that was recorded. It was a conference call between Donald Trump and a large number of U.S. governors, and then we will sit back and listen and absorb that. It is, I think, pretty staggering that an American president can say the things he did in that call. And then after that, we will reevaluate and see where we stand right now across the U.S. and what we know and what is coming in here. And then we will listen to Trump's declaration on the White House lawn about an hour and a half ago. Well, a bit more than that, I think, 2 hours ago. All right, so that's almost done. The other thing that while we're here, we did have to cancel or postpone our Patreon meeting for today. I apologize for that, but we have been doing basically nothing but prepping for the shows at 10 p.m. every night, doing a sort of a rundown of what's going on. Obviously, we're constantly coming up against more news that sort of affects the rest of the world. We really thought COVID would do it, and here we are amidst a number of protests going on really all around the world today, with people protesting against both the local and federal responses in the United States to what is obviously a profound injustice that goes on quite regularly across this country. Kwesa, 10,000 won, can't stay for the stream. Coming from a country that experienced similar social upheaval and The people triumphed. U.S. needs to rebuild grassroots democracy from the bottom up, from scratch. We've had some people suggest that we are viewing a revolution. Again, that would be a great topic if we were able to get a hold of Landon Knoll. He is unfortunately not available right now. But I think a great many revolutions do start this way, but you see this kind of thing in a great many countries quite regularly that don't end up having a revolution. So I don't know what's going to happen. I do know that if Trump does what he's suggesting he's going to do tonight, and if he actually engages with live ammunition against protesters, if they are declared enemy combatants and or terrorists and or insurgents or revolutionaries, the outrage from the rest of the world, at a minimum, is going to be quite profound, as well as the condemnation from the rest of the world. A number of Republican governors and congressmen are already condemning, well, I shouldn't say they're condemning this, but they have expressed profound concerns over how he's dealing with this. And I think it comes down to, if he escalates this, are tensions in the U.S. high enough that people will start to truly risk their lives to come out anyway? And then how many people does he have to kill before he realizes he's got a very big problem on his hands? Koisa, thank you very much. We appreciate your support as always. So thank you for joining us. So what I think we're going to do now is put this video on hold for a second. And we will switch over to the presidential call, the presidential phone call. This call took place, if I recall, earlier today, and was between Donald Trump and a number of states' governor in the United States. Let's take a listen.
A situation going on. It shouldn't be hard to take care of, and we're going to take care of it. And we've got a number of people here that you'll be seeing a lot of. General Milley is here, who's head of Joint Chiefs of Staff, a fighter, a warrior, had a lot of victories, had no losses. And he hates to see the way it's being handled in the various states, and I've just put him in charge. The Attorney General is here, right here, Bill Barr. And we will activate Bill Barr and activate him very strongly. We're strongly, and Secretary of Defense is here, we're strongly looking for arrests. You have to get much tougher. You're going to get overridden. I know Governor Walz is on the phone, and we spoke, and I fully agree with the way he handled it the last couple of days. I asked him to do that. Get a lot of men. We have all the men and women that you need, but people aren't calling them up. You have to dominate. If you don't dominate, you're wasting your time. They're going to run over you. You're going to look like a bunch of jerks. You have to dominate. And you have to arrest people, and you have to try people, and they have to go to jail for long periods of time. I saw what happened in Philadelphia. I saw what happened in Dallas, where they kicked a guy to death. I don't know if he died or not, but if he didn't, it's a miracle what they did to him. They were kicking him like I've never seen anything like it in my life. People don't talk about that. They don't talk about that. They're talking about a lot of other things, but they don't talk about that. But I saw what happened in Dallas. And those kids are all on camera. They're wise guys. And it's coming from the radical left. You know it. Everybody knows it. But it's also looters. And it's people that figure they can get free stuff by running into stores and running out with television sets. I saw it. The kid has a lot of stuff. He puts it in the back of a brand new car and drives off. You have every one of these guys on tape. Why aren't you prosecuting them? Now, the harder you are, the tougher you are, the less likely it is that you're going to be hit. There's a movement. We found out they're delivering supplies to various places in various states. Your people know about it now. But we found out many things. It's like a movement. And it's a movement that if you don't put it down, it'll get worse and worse. This is like Occupy Wall Street. It was a disaster until one day somebody said, that's enough, and they just went in and wiped them out. And the last time I heard the name Occupied Wall Street until today when I heard about it. I heard Occupied Wall Street. I haven't heard about it. I heard about it today for the first time in a long time. They were there for forever, it seemed, on Wall Street. They closed up Wall Street, the financial district of the world, and they had total domination. They were ordering pizzas. Nobody did anything. And then one day, somebody said, that's enough. You're getting out of here within 2 hours. And it was bedlam for an hour, and then after that, everything was beautiful. And that was the last time we heard about it. But these are the same people. These are radicals, and they're anarchists. They are anarchists, whether you like it or not. I know some of you guys are different persuasion, and that's okay. I fully understand it. I understand both. I'm for everybody. I'm representing everybody. I'm not representing radical right, radical left. I'm representing everybody. But you have to know what you're dealing with, and it's happened before. It's happened numerous times. And the only time it's successful is when you're weak. And most of you are weak. And I will say this, what's gone on in Los Angeles, I have a friend who lives in Los Angeles, they say all the storefronts are gone. They're all broken and gone. The merchandise is gone. It's a shame. It didn't look as bad as that to me. Maybe it was the sunshine. I don't know. But in Los Angeles, the storefronts are gone. Philadelphia's a mess. Philadelphia, what happened there is horrible. And that was on television. They're breaking into stores, and nobody showed up to even stop them. There was nobody showed up to stop them. Now, Washington, they had large groups, very large groups. They attacked the AFL-CIO building. So they attacked, in theory, their friends, which is very interesting. But Washington was under very good control, but we're going to have it under much more control. We're going to pull in thousands of people. And we were under guard of the D.C. police, the mayor of Washington, D.C. And Secret Service did a very good job around the White House, but their primary function is around the White House. And we're going to clamp down very, very strong. But you got to arrest people, you have to try people, you have to put them in jail for 10 years, and you'll never see this stuff again. And you have to let them know that. They're trying to get people out on bail in Minneapolis. I understand they're in there trying to get all these guys out on bail. So you have them on tape, you have them on television. In history, there's never been anybody taped so much committing a crime. You have these guys throwing rocks. You can see it. They showed it last night on one of the stations on one of the networks, throwing a big brick, and they had them in slow motion replay. They put them like it's like a fielder catching a ball or throwing a ball. They have them in slow motion replay. You see exactly who he is. Everybody knows. You'll find out exactly. You have everybody is on tape. You got to arrest all those people, and you got to try them. And if they get 5 years or 10 years, they have to get 5 years or 10 years. There's no retribution. So I say that, and the word is dominate. If you don't dominate your city and your state, they're going to walk away with you. And we're doing it in Washington and D.C. We're going to do something that people haven't seen before. But you're going to have total domination. And then you have to put them in jail, and you have to authorize whatever it is, whoever it is you authorize. So the best example, I alluded to it a couple of seconds ago, is Minneapolis. It was incredible what happened in the state of Minnesota. They were a laughing stock all over the world. They took over the police department. The police were running down the street, sirens blazing, the rest of them running. It was on camera. And then they wiped out. You probably have to build a new one, but I've never seen anything like it, and the whole world was laughing. 3 days later, I spoke to the governor, and the governor's, I think, on the call, and he's an excellent guy. And all of a sudden, and I said, you got to use the National Guard in big numbers. They didn't at first, then they did. And I'll tell you that I don't know what it was. It was the third night, fourth night. Those guys walked through that stuff like it was butter. They walked right through, and you haven't had any problems since. I mean, they know they're not going to go there. Now they'll go to some other place. But once you called out and you dominated, you took the worst place, and you made it. They didn't even cover it last night because there was so little action. Because you dominated. You dominated. Now, what happened to New York, I have to tell you, I live in Manhattan. What's going on in Manhattan, I have no idea. New York's finest. They got to be allowed maybe to do their jobs. I don't know what's happening in Manhattan, but it's terrible. And because it's New York, because it's Manhattan, it gets a lot of press. So they really spent a lot of time on it. But New York has got to have to toughen up. And we'll send you National Guard if you want. You have the largest police force in the country, 40,000 people, I understand. But what's going on in New York is terrible. It's terrible. Of all the places. What went on last night in Los Angeles with the stores and the storefronts is terrible. No domination. You have to dominate. If you're weak and don't dominate your streets, they're going to stay with you until you finally do it. And you don't want that. Philadelphia, you better toughen up because what's going on in Philadelphia, like New York, is terrible. It's terrible. You better toughen up. They'll never leave. I know you want to say, oh, let's not call up the Guard or let's call up 200 people. You've got a big National Guard out there that's ready to come in and fight like hell. I tell you, the best, what they did in Minneapolis was incredible. They went in and dominated. And it happened immediately. All of a sudden, my wife said to me, wow, look at all those people. They got out, they were wearing dark black uniforms. They got out, and they were there in the thousands. And they just walked right down the street, knocking them out with tear gas. Those guys, they were running. And the next night it was much less. And then the next night, it's like, you know what happened? They went to other cities. They're all looking for weak spots. Now what they're going to do is they're going to search out for perhaps smaller cities, smaller places. You got to arrest these people. And you got to charge them. And you can't do the deal where they get 1 week in jail. These are terrorists. They're looking to do bad things to our country. They're Antifa and they're radical left. And the reason you have other radicals is because they've been watching this for years, many years, and they don't like it. And go back and study Occupy Wall Street, because you'll see the way that ended was a thing of beauty. Everybody said, I can't believe how easy it was. It was an hour of bedlam. And when it was all over, it was a beautiful thing. Sure. I don't know what it is politically where you don't want to call out people. They're ready, willing, and able. They want to fight for the country. I don't know what it is. Someday you'll have to explain it to me. But it takes so long to call them up. We're waiting for you. We're shocked in certain areas. L.A., we're shocked that you're not using the greatest resource you can use, and they're trained for this stuff, and they're incredible. Why you're not calling them up? I don't know, but you're making a mistake because you're making yourself look like fools. And some have done a great job. But a lot of you, it's not good. It's very bad for our country. You know, when other countries watch this, they're watching us and they say, boy, they're really a pushover. And we can't be a pushover. And you have all the resources. It's not like you don't have the resources. So I don't know what you're doing. We'll take some questions if you want. I think Tim is on the phone now. Tim Walls. Again, I was very happy with the last couple of days, Tim. You called up big numbers, and the big numbers knocked them out so fast it was like bowling pins. You know, we have a situation. I was thinking about calling a number of you with flag burning. I'm not a believer in flag burning. And I would think that if a state wanted to try and pass a law, you're not allowed to burn flags with a certain punishment, strong punishment, I would think that the United States government would be backing you up all the way. So you're all on the phone right now. And I would think that the United States government would love to see somebody go and do that, because I think flag burning is a disgrace. And it passed last time, as you know, against what a lot of people want. It passed 5-4, and we have a different court. And I think that it's time to review that again, because when I see flags being burned, they wanted to crawl up flagpoles in Washington and try and burn flags, but we stopped them. They weren't able to do it, but they would have done it if we didn't stop them. I think it's time to relook at that issue. Hopefully the Supreme Court will accept that. But if you have a state where you feel strongly, and many of you do, most of you do, I'll bet, if you wanted to try and pass a very powerful flag burning statute against anti-flag burning, I hope you do it because we'll back you 100% all the way. Okay? So I hope some of you do it.
I think we have to be careful, but we have to be tough.
You don't have to be too careful. And I'll tell you, you have to do the prosecutions. If you don't do the prosecutions, they're just going to be back.
That's right.
Back. Whether it's in 2 years or in 2 months, they're going to be back. And you got to do the prosecutions. And, you know, when somebody's throwing a rock, that's like shooting a gun. What's the difference between having a brick that weighs 10 pounds, hit somebody in the face and wipe them out practically? We had a couple of people badly hurt, and there's no retribution. So you have to do retribution, in my opinion.
That's right.
You have to use your own legal system maybe for that. But you have great legal systems, everybody I'm speaking to. But if you want this to stop, you have to do that. But you have to prosecute people, Henry. You're right. Thank you very much. Hashtag,
Thank you.
please. Thanks, Henry. Is that JB? Are you on your cell phone, maybe? We're not hearing you great.
Can you hear me okay? Sorry, can you hear me okay, Mr. President?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to take this moment, I can't let it pass, to speak up and say that I've been extraordinarily concerned about the rhetoric that's been used by you. It's been inflammatory, and it's not okay for that officer to choke George Floyd to death. But we have to call for calm. We have to have police reform called for. We called out our National Guard and our state police, but the rhetoric that's coming out of the White House is making it worse. And I need to, say that people are feeling real pain out there. And we've got to have national leadership in calling for calm and making sure that we're addressing the concerns of the legitimate peaceful protesters. That will help us to bring together.
Thank you very much. I don't like your rhetoric much either. I don't like your rhetoric much either. I think you're going to do a good job, right? But that's okay. We don't agree with each other. As far as the
Next time I've ever said to the just tell me what you think.
I've spoken about it often, and I've spoken about it with great compassion, and I think it's a horrible thing that happened. And I've spoken out on numerous stages. I even spoke about it in our big pocket launch. I covered it before I covered the rocket. You said no $1 million rocket. And before I spoke about the rocket in a major speech after the rocket launch, I spoke about disgraced by it, not just our country, and the whole world was watching. So nobody can tell me I haven't spoken about it. I've spoken about it at great length, and I will continue to speak about it. But I also have to speak about law and order. We need law and order in our country. And if we don't have law and order, we don't have a country. So we need law and order.
That concludes our conference. Thank you to all of our speakers, and thank you all in the audience for joining us today. Again, this call is not intended for press purposes and is off the record. The call has concluded. You may disconnect.
Thank you. Hi. Yeah, as a muter suitor strikes again. So what we have here is, to the best of our understanding, what we're being told is there are now a minimum of 6 Black Hawk helicopters that are flying low over D.C. They appear to be trying to frighten and or shepherd or herd the protesters and trying to disperse the crowds by flying in low over them. We have a number of attorneys general, states attorneys general, and former military generals and governors who are saying at this point that they do not recognize Donald Trump's authority to deploy troops in their state. And they will not federalize the troops or allow their troops to be federalized in the employ of Donald Trump. He does have the right, presumably, to federalize the National Guard. If he does that, I think things will get interesting. If he is denied the right to deploy troops in the states, again, we discussed this earlier, that the Insurrection Act only allows him to deploy the troops if he is asked by the governors of each individual state. He has said he will deploy them anyway. They are so far all saying no, and a number of them have said that they anticipate all the governors across the United States to say no. Ostensibly, Governor of D.C. has said yes. At any rate, this would leave him with the only option of nationalizing the National Guard, or federalizing the National Guard, which if he did, would leave him in charge of them and those he could deploy. I don't believe that states have the right to resist that. We will see what happens. We're going to try to get some more footage. A number of the pieces of video that we managed to get gets taken down almost immediately as soon as we get it. So we're working as quickly as we can to copy it to our servers here before they get taken down. We've had a couple of sources of video that's the accounts are either down or blocked or made private. The last one, the account was made private. I think we've got on one more. We have what appears to be another report of another helicopter. We're going to show you this in a moment. Another helicopter in D.C. At least that's what we're hearing this is. One of now 6 that appear to have been identified in the area and are buzzing protesters in an attempt to either scare them off or in one way or another get them. Now, we have also gotten a hold of Landon Knoll, who is our expert on the Constitution and on American civics. He will be joining us in just a few minutes. We're preparing to, but we are very fortunate to be able to have him. So, all right, yeah. So we're trying to get these literally just as quickly as possible because we've lost 2 sources now, but we do believe. So we've got a second clip of helicopters over DC, so I will make that available in just one moment. Also try to be a little better about the sound on this one. In fact, too late. That there is a second helicopter. All right, both of these images purport to show helicopters, Apache helicopters, as I understand it. I unfortunately cannot identify one helicopter from another, hovering low over DC. Each of these appears to have been within the last 45 to 90 minutes and attempting to break up the crowd. We have images of tear gas and rubber bullets being used to disrupt protesters who appear to have been peaceful when they were deployed. In fact, CNN now has a synchronized footage of Donald Trump giving his speech talking about how Americans have the right to peaceful protest and he won't interfere with that, and that he will make sure that everyone's Second Amendment rights are left intact, but that he will go after the, quote, terrorists who are engaged in protests across the country. And at the same time, what was at that exact moment happening several blocks away in Washington, D.C., you can see a number of it's peaceful protesters, officers come up on them and start deploying tear gas and firing rubber bullets. We also see numerous military vehicles now deploying near the White House. So, yeah, a lot going on. Like I said, in just a moment, we are going to try to get Mr. Landon Knoll in here. And I just want to make sure that we have all right, that should be correct. All right, so we're going to attempt to bring in Mr. Landon Knoll momentarily. We just have a minor issue just because the sound is set to pipe in for what you're seeing here, and we just have to swap it out in order to get Mr. Knoll in here. People are saying I'm muted. Am I muted? I don't believe I am muted. I do believe, however, yes. So I just want to get a sound check and make sure that everyone there can hear me. I did have the sound on the helicopters up a bit too loud. I apologize. Like I said, there is footage of... Okay, great. There is footage of the protests being disrupted or being assaulted, peaceful protests being, what appears to be peaceful protests being coming under fire, tear gas, blocks away from Donald Trump while he was giving his speech. So, okay, and we have more footage of Black Hawk helicopters. So I'm going to try to get at a minimum one more, but I do want to bring in Mr. Landon Knoll. He has been of immense help to us. So there's now at a minimum what we are being told 6 Black Hawk helicopters outside of Washington, D.C. that are attempting to break up. He is correct. We've never seen this before. That was a heck of a speech. So what I would like to do, I will actually start, we will play the speech from President Trump where he appeared to suggest he was enacting the Insurrection Act. That is about a 6-minute speech, and we will be getting Landon Knoll in while we do that, and then we should have him once that is done. So without further ado, this is Donald Trump in his speech earlier today.
Thank you very much. My fellow Americans, my first and highest duty as president is to defend our great country and the American people. I swore an oath to uphold the laws of our nation, and that is exactly what I will do. All Americans were rightly sickened and revolted by the brutal death of George Floyd. My administration is fully committed that for George and his family, justice will be served. He will not have died in vain. But we cannot allow the righteous cries and peaceful protesters to be drowned out by an angry mob. The biggest victims of the rioting are peace-loving citizens in our poorest communities. And as their president, I will fight to keep them safe. I will fight to protect you. I am your president of law and order and an ally of all peaceful protesters. But in recent days, our nation has been gripped by professional anarchists, violent mobs, arsonists, looters, criminals, rioters, Antifa, and others. A number of state and local governments have failed to take necessary action to safeguard their residents. Innocent people have been savagely beaten, like the young man in Dallas, Texas, who was left dying on the street, or the woman in upstate New York viciously attacked by dangerous thugs. Small business owners have seen their dreams utterly destroyed. New York's finest have been hit in the face with bricks. Brave nurses who have battled the virus are afraid to leave their homes. A police precinct has been overrun here in the nation's capital. The Lincoln Memorial and the World War II Memorial have been vandalized. One of our most historic churches was set ablaze. A federal officer in California, an African-American enforcement hero, was shot and killed. These are not acts of peaceful protest. These are acts of domestic terror. The destruction of innocent life and the spilling of innocent blood is an offense to humanity and a crime against God. America needs creation, not destruction. Cooperation, not contempt. Security, not anarchy. Healing, not hatred. Justice, not chaos. This is our mission, and we will succeed. 100%, we will succeed. Our country always wins. That is why I am taking immediate presidential action to stop the violence and restore security and safety in America. I am mobilizing all available federal resources, civilian and military, to stop the rioting and looting, to end the destruction and arson, and to protect the rights of law-abiding Americans, including your Second Amendment rights. Therefore, the following measures are going into effect immediately. First, we are ending the riots and lawlessness that has spread throughout our country. We will end it now. Today, I have strongly recommended to every governor to deploy the National Guard in sufficient numbers that we dominate the streets. Mayors and governors must establish an overwhelming law enforcement presence until the violence has been quelled. If a city or state refuses to take the actions that are necessary to defend the life and property of their residents, then I will deploy the United States military and quickly solve the problem for them. I am also taking swift and decisive action to protect our great capital, Washington, D.C. What happened in this city last night was a total disgrace. As we speak, I am dispatching thousands and thousands of heavily armed soldiers, military personnel, and law enforcement officers to stop the rioting, looting, vandalism, assaults, and the wanton destruction of property. We are putting everybody on warning. Our 7 o'clock curfew will be strictly enforced. Those who threaten innocent life and property will be arrested, detained, and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. I want the organizers of this terror to be on notice that you will face severe criminal penalties and lengthy sentences in jail. This includes Antifa and others who are leading instigators of this violence. One law and order, and that is what it is. One law. We have one beautiful law. And once that is restored and fully restored, we will help you, we will help your business, and we will help your family. America is founded upon the rule of law. It is the foundation of our prosperity, our freedom, and our very way of life. But where there is no law, there is no opportunity. Where there is no justice, there is no liberty. Where there is no safety, there is no future. We must never give in to anger or hatred. If malice or violence reigns, then none of us is free. I take these actions today with firm resolve and with a true and passionate love for our country. By far, our greatest days lie ahead. Thank you very much. And now I'm going to pay my respects to a very, very special place. Thank you very much.
My sound's off. Hi there. Sorry. Thank you. I definitely am having sound issues. So, while he was saying that those words, there was a protest in D.C. that was being broken up. It was a peaceful protest from all reports. It was a peaceful protest. CNN has a split view of that protest during the speech, and you can see in real time what Donald Trump is saying and what is happening to that protest just outside, or several blocks away from where Donald Trump was giving it. We now have more footage than I can shake a stick at, quite frankly, of deployments. Now we're going to try to recover. There was one of what appears to be a military deployment in LA. We can't confirm that, and that footage is down. We have lost some footage of the helicopters. There was now one over Chinatown in DC, but it's quite clear we have more footage than we can shake a stick at coming in of helicopters. It's insane. There's helicopters, at least 6 over DC right now, and we now have on with us Landon. No, Landon, how are you?
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your time zone, latitude, and safety status. I hope that people are remaining safe, and it's good to assist you in trying to make heads or tails on this situation. We're all at 6s and 9s.
Yeah, it's really quite remarkable. Let's start with the legal status. If you can tell us what we know so far is we've discussed posse comitatus, which is the part of the Constitution that says that the U.S. military cannot be deployed inside the United States for police action. It applies ostensibly only to the Army and Navy, Army and Air Force, I believe. Navy does not apply, nor Coast Guard, but they have traditionally been, it's
an act of the United States federal law, 18 U.S.C. 1385. That was established actually in 1878 by then Rutherford B. Hayes. Really, the purpose is to limit the powers of the federal government using the military to enforce domestic policies within the United States. That's the function, and so when you hear the president talking about calling in the military, it's hard to tell whether or not he is intent on talking about Army, Air, Navy, Air Force, etc., or he is just speaking hyperbole. He's not always clear in terms of what he means. But the most people, when you hear him saying, "I'm going to call in the military," think that he can do it. It is a power, as I read the act, it prohibits.
Oh, you're breaking up.
Navy enforce domestic policies. Right. Now, there are cases if we were invaded by someone, we could. Go ahead.
Oh, you were breaking up briefly there, so I was just one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try to reduce some of the load on the system. I think people have got the idea with the helicopters, so we'll try to reduce some of the load here. But so you were breaking up there for a minute. So, but yeah, it's to keep the president of the United States from using the military to help enforce domestic policy. Is that am I understanding correctly?
Yes, and it was case that state afraid on the states. And so it was an act, passed by Congress, signed into law by then President Rutherford B. Hayes, who, interestingly enough, came into office under interesting circumstances. But that's a different story. And
this vehicle and those guys over there got out of the other vehicle. There's a gold store.
Post-Civil War and a lot of things where they were sort of afraid.
This vehicle and those guys over there got out of the other vehicle. There's a gold store.
Get its way and enforce domestic policies. There are very limited cases if, for example, the United States were invaded. The military could be used to invade. That's not. But if President Trump wishes to establish his so-called law and order, if he wishes to stop rioting, that's a domestic policy, and the Posse Comitatus Act would presumably prohibit that from happening. Now, the problem is that, and I think Trump may know this or doesn't care about his oath of office. If he so chooses.
The president may not. The last bit I heard was he may not know this or may not care, and then you cut out.
Oh, I'm sorry. So in one case is that the president may not know or may not care about the prohibition of use of the military, but in some cases he may be thinking he'll do it anyway and attempt to see what happens in the courts, right? Because if the president were to begin to use the military, then presumably people would sue, and they would, states might even sue, ask the Supreme Court for emergency relief, and we would see what would happen. Hopefully it would not institute a constitutional crisis, but in effect, if the president, the situation in practical terms, if the president can get away with it, is allowed to get away with it, it'll establish a dangerous precedent, and he might be able to be stopped.
All right. So there is a careful. Yeah, there is an outbreak in the Congo. I had heard actually may not have been Ebola, but there is. We're going to try to keep an eye on that too. It's a bit of a busy night. So. A couple of questions and/or observations, and then we have some footage from Van Nuys, California. But before we get into that, so right now, the way I read the Insurrection Act, so I guess my biggest concerns are as follows. One, if he's using that, what happens if he does declare these protesters enemy combatants? What is the limits of what he can get the U.S. military to do? What happens to their rights even if they're on U.S. soil? And then what happens if governors refuse to allow them to deploy here and he tries to deploy them anyway?
Well, the Insurrection Act is actually Insurrection Act of 1807. It's also a federal law, 10 U.S.C. 251 through 255. It actually intends to limit presidential power, relying on state and local governments actually for the response to an action. And so, but there are cases where, so what's supposed to happen is a state is supposed to request assistance and then be granted. And for example, this particular situation has happened some 10 times in the history of the United States. Most recently, under George H.W. Bush in 1992 regarding the 1992 Los Angeles riots. Then the governor asked for assistance. So the thing that would happen legally is that states would have to request and to federalize the National Guard. But his belief is it allows the president to request the state government to federalize the National Guard, and the state has to actually comply. It is not clear which states do it. Now, D.C. is a special case, and apparently the process, I believe, is the mayor of D.C., since he is not a state, may have requested federal assistance. That's actually been somewhat common in unrest in the Capitol. In other places, when you heard Trump talking to lecturing the governors, he has to realize that it is the states has to request it. Now,
All right.
Ironically, African Americans from attacks by the Ku Klux Klan.
All right, hold on one second. Okay, and we do have a question. I want to get to that in a minute, but what I actually want to do here is our system is getting slowed down because we have a lot of video queued up to play. So, and then you're cutting out on occasion as a result of it. So I'm gonna.
Would it be better for me to turn off my video and just hear my audio, or would you try that?
That would actually probably improve our system somewhat because it would reduce the rendering process. Let's keep you on. We want to see that beautiful face. Okay, yeah, there you go. That that actually did have a noticeable effect. But now, why don't you put it? Come back, because I do like being able to. I mean, I think reactions are important.
Okay.
I do appreciate it.
All right.
We may end up doing that, but I think for now. But here's what I'm going to do. Because we weren't really the system just wasn't designed to hold quite this much footage. We now have just an immense amount of footage of helicopters. Buzzing crowds in D.C. apparently in violation of FAA laws regarding, now of course it's military, but they're in cities flying below 1,000 feet. But what we're going to show you now is footage from Van Nuys, California. What is happening here is police officers appear to initially stop looters who are actively looting stores, and then let the looters go. At least this is what this is reported. This is actually reported by Fox News 11, Fox Local 11 in Van Nuys, California. The police let the looters go and then arrest the protesters. So this is Van Nuys, California.
The looter go?
They were,
okay, description. Black, white, Asian.
African Americans.
Okay.
To show you how easily and quickly things can go wrong or can be misinterpreted.
Wow.
Christina.
This is one of the wildest things I've ever seen. And then to see that.
They're taking the woman from the car. She's not involved. She just stopped to look.
Okay.
I think she is with these people. And she came over to get her mom because she saw it on TV.
Well,
This vehicle and those guys over there got out of the other vehicle. There's a gold store in the parking lot. And they were heading to it. And these guys came out and they said, "No, you're not."
Wow.
And he's with us. They're having a standoff here.
Oh, my God.
Arguing about why they're not being allowed to break into the place. Here comes the cops. They're trying to flag them down. We're trying to flag down the cops. Hold on, let me flag them back here. They're driving past us. Stop.
this is one of the most surreal moments we've seen. What is underway right now in Van Nuys. All right, so here come the police officers to help these community members.
The guys on the other side are in cars. All right, here they come. The guys here are trying to stop over there from looting in the cars. All right, now they're telling them, no, they're fine.
They're good.
Oh, gosh.
Oh, no.
Whoa.
Oh, my God. Joe, to your right. Come on. He's with us. Sir, they got their... Okay, sir. They're the store owners. They were protecting the looters, sir.
Whoa.
They're protecting the store. The looters are over there.
Please.
You're losing your looters store joint.
All three of them. Hey, we're putting those in handcuffs right now.
You knew that.
Where's the looter? Where's the looter?
They're helping protecting this building.
Where'd the looter go? Hey, description. Black, white,
African Americans.
To show you how easily and quickly things can go wrong or can be misinterpreted.
Wow. This is one of the wildest things I've ever seen. And then to see that.
They're taking the woman from the car. She's not involved. She just stopped to look.
Okay.
All right, so what we have there, and I know unfortunately Landon was not able to hear it. I apologize, probably listening in on the stream is going to miss most of that because the stream is slowing down. We're a little behind now, but what that was a number of there was looters, there were shopkeepers and civilians trying to protect the store from the looters. The police showed up. They got very confused when a news crew from Fox 11 pointed out who the owners were and said, these are the owners, they're okay. The looters went that way, and then they arrested the owners. And then they said, no, those are the wrong people. They said, no, we got it under control. We're good. Everything's fine. They said, no, you're arresting the wrong people. They said, yeah, we're arresting them. It's good. Like, no, these are the wrong people. Like, no, those aren't the looters. Yep, that's why we're arresting them. Like, no, they're not the, wait, who's the looters? And there was, and then they appeared to pull a random woman out of a car. Yeah, so, and unfortunately, these are the kinds of things that really often, of course, do happen a lot when things are dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. So we're gonna check in a little bit and try to figure out what's going on in D.C. We now have a circle of squad cars that appear to have encircled the police precinct. The consensus seems to be that they are preparing to do something. What, I don't know. There aren't any protesters there, so it's just a whole row of police cars that have circled up, and who knows what precisely is going on. So we're going to try to keep an eye on that. And so Landon Knoll is here with us to try to put some calm, inject some calm into what's going on today. So I guess it looks like the well, that's well into the video. Okay, I'm going to have to check there. It looks like most of these were actually designed to be protections against abuse of power.
Yes, and by the way, I can improve the connection on my part. It may require me to reconnect, but you also mentioned there was a question in the chat that we want to.
Yes, there was. Thank you for getting me back to that. Let me. So the question was from Kimo Maki: does posse comitatus devolve the administration of justice system away from the civil courts? Okay, I didn't understand that at first. I think what he's saying is if you use posse comitatus to deploy the U.S. military in the United States, and now he seems to be saying that these are terrorists, does that mean that they would be tried by military tribunals, or would they be tried in the U.S. as U.S. citizens?
As I understand that terrorists, even domestic terrorists, are tried in particularly in the U.S., would be tried with the U.S. courts. If the action were you had a terrorist abroad that the military had apprehended, there seems to be precedence of that being tried in a military court. But in the case of domestic terrorists, they have gone to I think, for example, one of the examples is Timothy McVeigh was tried in federal court in its attack against the federal building. So that seems to be the process. Again, while we have the Constitution and the rule of law, as Trump sort of oddly said, one law, but we actually have a set of laws, federal and state and local. The other thing to remember is sometimes it's a matter of what some people act as and what can they get away with. So if, for example, the president were to a number of people that would attempt to bring suit against him and attempt to perhaps even go straight to the Supreme Court to get a ruling. The question would be, honor did, he might stand down, but again, you tell me what the Supreme Court is going to do.
Well, and I mean, again, the other thing is, I mean, I guess I don't.
We've had things from, for example, Dwight Eisenhower used an exception to Prosecution Act derived from the Arkansas governor opposed the desegregation in the court. That was a Brown v. Education desegregation ruling in 1954. The Enforcement Acts allow when states are unable or unwilling to suppress violence that is in opposition to citizens' constitutional rights. So there appears to be wiggle room within that regard. But again, it's a matter of whether or not it would be challenged in court and what would happen.
All right, so we've had a request, and I will drop it in the. We've had a request. We should actually have like either a receipts. We don't, I think, have a receipts room or anything like that, but we do. We had a request for. I'll probably just drop it in the news sharing then for the audio from Donald Trump. It's you can get it in a couple of places. It's actually been reasonably hard to get. Fox had it, but theirs even on the live directly off their website had. A really bad reverb and kept echoing a number of pieces of it. We have a cleaned up version that was also that we've edited just for time. We've put it down. Yep. Okay, I've got it here. We edited it for time. Oh no, that's his speech. The call was 16 minutes, and we just brought it down. We cut out a lot of the other governors speaking. There were some governors speaking and other things, and we pulled that to try to just sort of limit that. So that's being uploaded right now. That will be in the news sharing section probably by the time you get this, or by the time you hear this, because there's a bit of a delay. You will see it there. Yeah, we are having some audio issues, and
hopefully those will improve as the network improves.
Yep, I've actually managed to boost the network a bit, and I'm gonna do a few other things to
now. I will say so. Some issues with the Prosecution Caucus was originally dealing with the United States Army. So the things like the Air Force would, the question about the Navy and the Marines are not mentioned anywhere in the Act. And of course, the so-called Space Force is not mentioned in the Act as well. So also neither is the Coast Guard. So there's some ambiguity as to the Act and the current status. It would depend again on what the court would have. So the Enforcement Acts is a important modification we have to look at. It was a set of bills passed in 1870 where the criminal codes that protected African American rights to vote, and receive equal protection were being, thwarted. Basically, the things like the 14th Amendment and 15th Amendment issues were in effect, and so the Act attempted to try and allow the United States to enforce those items, particularly laws banning the KKK entirely and other things occurred. And so there is also wiggle room. So even though the initial intent of the Act is there, it's been amended twice, and you have to look at what the courts would do with regards to any action that Trump may have.
All right. I have managed to, Art to boost this. I have managed to figure out. So the largest source of the issue was actually we had multiple videos playing, and yes, a technical thing, hardware acceleration was not enabled, so it was all relying on the CPU, and it was slowing us down, and so it wasn't decoding your stream properly. But that has been fixed, and we're down to a manageable 95% CPU load. So we're doing well. So a couple of updates too, and I had forgotten to do this. I wanted to do a little house cleaning before we continue. So in fact, actually, I probably should do a rundown. What we've got now is it looks like 23 states have activated the National Guard. DC has activated National Guard. We have helicopters, what we understand to be 6 helicopters, buzzing crowds, flying what is considered by the FAA to be dangerously low. They are, we do have reports of military deployments at a minimum in DC and one unconfirmed report of a military deployment in Los Angeles. We have in about a dozen countries and multiple cities across the globe, multiple protests. You can see Italy on your screen right now. We're going to be showing a number of other Canada, in Dublin, and we've got all sorts of yeah, I've just about had it with taking shit from the live chat. So one of them said, "What kind of chip do we have here?" A Dorito. Yeah, no, it's okay. Give me a break. It's we got a producer. It's me right now. So we'll have to. Okay, that's it. We did have to postpone our regularly scheduled Patreon meeting today. We were preparing for this stream, and we've been sort of preparing. But we do want to thank all of our patrons. We apologize that we didn't have the meeting. We are currently going through news as it updates in our Discord. You can come join our Discord for any discussions as to what's going on. We often have discussions afterwards in the voice chat. We also have Dr. Richard Carrier on tomorrow for just a regularly scheduled program, 9 p.m. We will be discussing he is a PhD in ancient history, and we will be discussing the role of Christianity in ancient science as science developed. How did Christianity influence science? All right. Yeah, I can. I got your message, Tony. I will get on that. It'll take a few minutes. Thank you. So, let's see. So where were we? Yeah, So he is ostensibly now designating the protesters as terrorists. That's what he said they were, both in a private phone call between himself and an unknown number of governors across the United States, and that is what he said in the speech he gave, about a 6-minute speech he gave earlier in the day. Does that designation hold? Is he capable of doing that designation to the best of your ability? And what does that mean going forward for these protesters?
Well, in terms of the terrorists, if they were declared as terrorists and the courts upheld that designation, they would have special circumstances with regards to their arrest. They also would have special circumstances for using intelligence services to try to go after these people or identify these people. Domestically, locally, cities and states are monitoring communications and media, and are monitoring the movement of cell phones in an attempt to try and head off congregations of people. One of the problems they're finding is that there is a fraction of people that committing acts of violence, acts of looting. There's a larger group that are out there protesting. There's a larger group that are out there trying to capture film in order to post it on social media for social media validation points, I'm not sure. And those people that are going out to try and do so are in some ways complicating the problem of trying to quell the disturbances, because law enforcement rise on scene if they're able to against someone committing an act of violence or vandalism, and they are met with protesters, and they're met with an even larger group of people that want to get that particular bit of footage to upload onto some social media. That's there, and that's if I had to request some people don't go out and try to be a news reporter and try to record these sort of things, because you are only making the job of trying to keep people safe harder. There are legitimate news reporters out there and news sources out there, and the problem with these extra so-called people reporters is that they are making it difficult for law enforcement to distinguish between press and non-press. In some cases, the law enforcement is perhaps incorrectly just getting fed up and saying everyone gets arrested. And you saw with that particular clip of showing where the law enforcement is coming in on a scene filled with pandemonium. I'm not excusing what they did, but they were confused. It's not always clear when law enforcement shows up who is a looter, who's a peaceful protester, and who is there trying to get social media footage for upload purposes. Particularly when things are going rather bad, it's not a good idea to be out there. If you're a protester and you are peacefully protesting and you're there and you're using your phone for that purposes, but the problem, of course, is that a bunch of people out there who are beyond the protesters just go out there to try and upload stuff to TikTok and other places like that to try and gain, as they call it, social media validation points. This is not the time to do that. There are plenty of press, as you can see, monitoring the situation, as well as if you are just choosing to exercise your First Amendment rights and attempting to peaceably protest, recognize that one of your problems is that if you have people provoking and creating acts of, establishing acts of violence, acts of vandalism, looting, then the police can use stuff to declare the assembly an illegal assembly. And even though you may be protesting peaceably, the police will then, rightly or wrongly, then decide to shut the whole thing down. We know from the 1960s that there were federal agencies, for example, the FBI, that would send people into a protest in order to provoke something and trigger a situation where it was then shut down. And I don't believe that this behavior has stopped. So that's one of the problems with protesting is the authorities can, through undercover people, go there. Now, this is also the case. You have outsiders, right? We've seen in other domestic disturbances that outsiders have come in looking to cause trouble. And that also complicates the ability of peaceful protests. You may be peaceful in your protest, but the protest may not remain peaceful is one of the problems, one of the dangers. And I'm not excusing the mistakes, but we got to be realistic about what's happening here.
And we have had some reports, and we've been discussing that. And I do actually want to get your discussion, your insight on the BRICS and what was going on with that. But before we do that, let me ask you a question. What do you think? You're Donald Trump now, or you're not Donald Trump, because if you were, you'd probably be an idiot.
All right.
But yeah, what do you do?
Let's say you're the president and you refuse.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, the presidential thing to do is to try and appeal for calm, try to provide assistance to state and local authorities that request it, try to talk to the governors and the major mayors to see how can we be of help. when you heard that conversation by the president, you heard a sort of a kind of a schoolboy-like tattling on people and telling them we're going to be doing this stuff. You did not hear someone say, how can we be of help? Do you need our assistance? Would you like to invoke the acts that would, for example, Insurrection Act, that allow us to assist you? What other things can we do? Because there are things that they can provide, or logistics they provide, if there's cooperation. But what you saw and what I heard the language was more on the order of a political stunt rather than a how can we be of help. And it was like, and if you don't do it, we're going to do it for you, right? I would speculate that what will happen if Trump attempts to push his way into an enforcement action, that he might be selective as to which states he does that to. He may choose to make certain states look bad or good. And the reason why is based on his past behavior. And all I can say is at that point, if he does that, one would hope that there would be plenty of people with standing, ability to sue, to go to emergency would be a federal area, would be actually in practice, even if it's states doing that suit, the attorney generals could go and apply immediately to the Supreme Court for relief and see what the Supreme Court is doing. Supreme Court's kind of busy right now with, ironically, some very same things happening of whether the president can ignore subpoenas, whether the president can do a number of things. Well, I don't know how the Supreme Court will respond. That is a problem. So again, the answer is that the Constitution law may state what's happening, but in some ways it can be a case where what is someone allowed to get away with? If Congress passes an unconstitutional law, the president signs into law and enforces it unconstitutionally, and people let them get away with that, then we would see that continue. It's only when you go to the court, and if the court says it's unconstitutional, can you get that overturned? Same thing. If he were doing something which someone were say is in violation of the Insurrection Act, or in violation of the Posse Comitatus Act as amended with things like the Enforcement Acts, the question would be whether the court would hear it, and if so, would they have an emergency session, or would they grant emergency suspension? Would Trump honor that suspension? Who knows? But you heard within those two speeches, that one is the thing with the governors, and the other the Rose Garden speech, him invoking things that are more along the lines of playing to his base, like bringing up the flag burning stuff. Yeah. The flag burning has been something that has been stopped by the Senate again and again because they've not been able to get 2/3 of the Senate. And in fact, even at times where the one party is held dominant in the Senate, they've been able to get that through as a potential amendment. He, again, either because he doesn't know or doesn't care, was saying to the states, hey, go ahead and pass your own flag burning act. Perhaps with the excuse that maybe the Supreme Court wouldn't overturn it. But as I read the law now, if the state of X said you can't burn flags in protests, the very likely would be challenged in court, and if the courts are consistent, they would overturn it on a number of grounds. But again, it's what can they get away with it, and what will the new Supreme Court do? So when you're thinking about voting, I know this is too early for our Supreme Court set, but when you think about voting, pay attention. If Trump knew that he had a whole bunch of his friends on the court, the stuff he could get away with would be enormous. So right now we have several problems. We have unsafe conditions, people rioting, people looting, people being put in danger, and law enforcement agencies trying to, in some cases, ineffectively stop that, making mistakes. and people getting caught up in those mistakes, as well as the case of the what sparked this stuff, what appears to be a deliberate criminal act of murder. That being said, that doesn't excuse what's happening. But on the other hand, one of the things that's holding us away from, Trump talked about his one law. What's holding this country together is also the rule of law and the rule of the Constitution. And I think it's just as bad for Trump to sit there and say, we have to have law, we have to be forceful, we have to have overwhelming force. At the same time, making statements he knows or should know that are unconstitutional or illegal. Moreover, he should be having his advisors telling him, oh, Mr. President, there's this act, right? Maybe he doesn't know about Insurrection Act and so forth. Someone, as part of his roles of advisors, and even the role of the Attorney General, to come and say, Mr. President, the law says this.
Yeah, I'm sure somebody's told him, but he seems to in general not care. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a brief rundown because we've had a lot of turnover and people coming in and out and leaving. So what we have now is what started ostensibly 7 days ago as protests in one city in Minneapolis, Minnesota, turned to 4 cities, turned to about 30 cities, and is now well over, it depends on how you define it. There's actually, by one count, there are now protests in about 120 cities across the United States. 40 cities have imposed curfews, and more than 23 states have deployed the National Guard. Active duty troops have been deployed to Washington, D.C., and one report of active duty troops being seen in Los Angeles. We have numerous reports of, and we've seen footage, and you can see some footage here. I'll refresh that with another one in a little bit. But we have a number of images of helicopters flying low and trying to buzz the crowds in D.C. and shake them off. We've heard numerous reports of tear gas and pepper spray. We've seen, and we've covered yesterday, I mean, there was, yesterday certainly seemed a bit more violent. I don't know why today seems less so. It may be that, from what we're hearing, people are not obeying the curfews any more than usual, but there has been a lot of pushback. Donald Trump has suggested that he hasn't suggested, he's outright said that he's going to deploy the military. And if the governors do not clean up their own states in regards to these riots, he will do it for them. He has quite clearly now deployed some elements of the U.S. military in Washington, D.C. There is a tremendous amount of pushback from the governors across the country to this move, saying that he is not permitted to deploy military in their state. The Houston chief of police, who was seen protesting with protesters and walking with them, has said, quote, on behalf of the police chiefs of this country, please, if you do not have something constructive to say, keep your mouth shut. Massachusetts. Yes, were you going to?
Well, I say, and one of the things in particular, it seems like, I mean, we don't know of any state that has come to Trump and says, please, and help invoke the Insurrection Act. We ask you, right? This is an interesting case of states' rights versus federal rights. But also understand that, if for example, law enforcement has declared the assembly to be illegal, or they have instituted a curfew legally, your ability to protest during the time of that curfew is very limited. And so if you're saying, well, I'm going to want to peaceful protest, and you have the right to do so, and I would, if that's your calling, do so with understanding of the risks. If there is a place where there is a curfew, or the assembly is declared illegal, your ability to protest has been terminated in that case, right? You can go online. You can protest online. You can protest by communicating to your law enforcement. You can also protest at the ballot box. But if you're in a city where there's a curfew and you're breaking curfew, you can't use as a defense, well, I was out there protesting or was out there trying to film what's happening, even though if you think that's the right thing to do, in my opinion. What do you think, Nick?
That's a difficult one. I think we are still struggling with the definition of journalism in this country. I think we are struggling with, what happens when somebody who has no training, does not have a formal code of ethics to which they are supposed to adhere, who goes out and starts recording things. We get people like what's his name, who's done all that edited footage for the right. He resulted in the destruction of Acorn and a few. I've forgotten the guy's name. Someone will probably drop that in the live chat. But he's he considers himself a journalist and has no integrity that I can tell. And I get nervous about people doing it for the sake of doing it. We are intrinsically, I think, voyeurs. Most of us rubberneck at the road, and there are reasons for that. On the flip side, it is dangerous. And right now, I think the greater. Don't get me wrong. I'm somebody whose bread and butter is what people actually get, because we're showing footage from this. But there's enough protesters now who are there for their own reasons, who are recording these things. I don't think we have to muddy the waters. If you're not a professional journalist, you shouldn't be out there explicitly for the purpose of recording things.
I mean, professional journalists also have communication processes. They have ways to protect themselves. They have channels with the law enforcement to make sure that they know where they are, so they can law enforcement doesn't and mistakenly, even though it happens, right? That's one of the things that happens when you have pandemonium and chaos, is you get police making arrests of journalists. This isn't the first time it happened, but it's a risk. Even so, to declare yourself a member of the press, that you are doing, understand that it says Congress shall pass no law and blah blah blah, and part of that First Amendment says right of a free press, right? That doesn't mean that you can declare yourself press and then be exempt from things like curfews.
All right, we have a good question from Omarosa Moon that I do want to get to, but I have two other questions I'd like to get to too. So Omarosa, we will get to that. But the first one, actually no, let's do hers first, and then we'll get to the others because they're queuing up. But I want to do that one first. She has asked, has anyone mentioned citizens arrests, and what are the roles of citizens arrests? Can citizens make arrests, or is that just sort of a kind of lore? What is a citizen's arrest and how does it work?
I mean, citizen arrest is actually made by a private citizen who's not a law enforcement officer, and it differs in various jurisdictions. But in the United States, in common law, most states are codified that a warrantless arrest may be made by a private citizen, for a breach of a peace. But what you have to do is the private person may arrest another for a public offense committed or attempted to commit in their presence. It's something that the person has been arrested, has committed a felony, though not in their presence, or the felony in fact has committed and she has reasonable cause to believe the person has committed it. And then there's a whole process by which you then have to have, you have a case where you're then supposed to get a hold, holding them until the police get there is effectively what that does. Now, understand that there are liabilities involved in that sort of thing, although they differ in their, you're not authorized necessarily to use deadly force, and that you granted some immunity, but not like police do with theirs. So there's a risk involved in that. And it turns out that if you've made a false charge, you're responsible for, you could be charged with a misdemeanor of false arrest because it's not been committed. And an example of that, let's take that case you saw of that footage where the police started arresting the shop owners rather than the looters. Instead of the police, if there was a citizen coming along and saying, "Oh, I'm going to go and arrest this person for looting," and they say, no, you've got the wrong person. Those are the ones doing looting. These are the shop owners trying to keep their set. The thing that you could be liable for is if you go and insist on arrest and detain that person, you could actually have some liability on that. Now, there's something called shopkeeper's privilege, and in which the shopkeeper is allowed to detain a suspect, say shoplifter, until the police arrived. That's another thing that's been that courts have ruled. So it kind of depends upon the circumstances there, but it's a part of common law. That's complicated. By the way, I'm not a lawyer. I'm just giving you what I understand the situation to be.
We have a intro that we play now, just a disclaimer, and we're basically like, nobody here is a lawyer, even though lawyers are not operating as a lawyer. Don't take, if you listen to a word we say, there's probably, my condolences that we are your experts, but nonetheless, please continue.
But have a legal counsel, for example, in California, look up California Penal Code 837, talking about the clarification on, and you can look that up online, clarification about California, of citizen arrests. Bear in mind that if you don't understand law and you don't understand the details, you could be misled, right? You want to have competent counsel and advisors to help you understand this complicated process.
All right, we're gonna we have some new footage, and we're getting some really strange reports, and we have some footage to back it up. So we'll be bringing that up in a minute. I do have the other question I wanted to ask you. Well, there's two, but I want to get into. You had talked about the tactic that the FBI used to use of pretending to be protesters and then instigating so that they could then move in. We've been seeing for the last 3 days pallets of bricks being deposited in various places. We have some photos of trucks and some video of trucks actually depositing those bricks. Now, the first day that we saw it, one of the things I said was, look, everybody's getting very antsy and very sort of very paranoid. You see a pallet of bricks. That pallet of bricks could have gotten there any number of ways. It could have been protesters who planned to use them. It could have been cops who were trying to set up the protesters. It could have been a guy who was taking the bricks to a construction site, saw all the protesters and said, whoa, dumped the bricks, and then just went back to his boss and said, oh, I got looted. And, there's any number of ways that those could have gotten there. But we're seeing an increasing number of these pallets of bricks being left in very conspicuous locations. It's impossible to know who, what, where, when, or how, but it is something that you brought up. So I wanted to know, have you heard of that, and do you have any opinions on that?
I've not heard of that thing. It's not out of character with what's happened in the past, and one would hope that the current things are that we've learned from the past. But I suspect the answer is no. We have not learned from the past. And so you can see the times where law enforcement can become overzealous. We saw, for example, the attempts in the 1960s to infiltrate into otherwise peaceful organizations and getting people to try to incite the organization to do things that move them closer and closer and closer to acts of illegal acts. And then you have people coming into a crowd and then trying to get the crowd mentality, the crowd, so that can be quite scary. And if you get somebody egging them on and passions are high and police are making mistakes or police are deliberately making mistakes, then all kinds of crazy stuff can happen, which is again why I would urge you, if you're not out there lawfully protesting in a place that's permitted, don't go out there and think you're going to upload your Instagram, Venmo, TikTok thing, right? Let the professional press people handle that job.
So, and then I'm going to ask you one more question. Then we've got this footage here. I'm going to tell you about what we're hearing that is going on in D.C. Because it's going to tie into this. Anyway, what we've heard now, some people suggesting that the press is in some cases being deliberately targeted. We've had footage of a CNN press crew. The reporter had a vest on. The vest said press. There were lights, there were cameras. It would have been almost impossible not to recognize them as a press crew. Nonetheless, that CNN reporter came under fire from rubber bullets, a significant amount of fire. We've had a number of other instances where another CNN crew came under fire from a great deal of gas canisters, and they were in the middle of the street. They clearly were press. They had the cameras rolling, and they were reporting. He was holding a mic. We had someone who had successfully handed his press credentials to a police officer, was then thrown to the ground, and then a police officer was speaking to him, and then he got maced. We had the press standing where they had been told to stand, and then a police officer leveled a automatic gun. Yeah, so we've had a number of these. Some of these I chalk up to, that one appeared to be one officer getting overzealous and just, But do you think the press are being targeted? If so, why might they be? And if not, I guess I don't have any follow-up questions.
Well, I think one of the things is that we are in a situation where the President of the United States has made it part of his personal political game to go and antagonize the press. We see that there are people who actually attack the press because of this so-called fake news meme that he has been pushing forward. And so his disdain for the press, and the press is disdain for him, right? It's not, I would not be surprised if he is choosing or asking or requesting that press be curtailed. Also, there's been past law enforcement has seen the press as a hindrance to trying to establish law and order. Again, I'm not trying to justify. I'm explaining to you what happens, where the press will announce something is happening, and then a whole bunch of people flock to the area to see what's happening, and then a bunch of people that are pretending to cause trouble go there as well. And so sometimes what the press does is creates their own self-fulfilling prophecy. On the other hand, the press has a very important thing during these protests to record, to document, and to inform people what's going on. To record, sometimes it's the press that are more effectively record what's happening. And if there are criminal civil charges directed at law enforcement, sometimes it's the press that is able to give some of the best testimony. Now, that being said, that we've seen cases where the press has been detained and released, and they apologize later. Whether that apology is sincere or not, I'll leave that up to you. But it is a problem when you have civil unrest, that things get pretty much out of hand. It's one of the risks that unfortunately the member of the press has to face. Competent journalism and competent journalists that have been well trained have ways to handle stuff, have safety measures in place to try to minimize that. Which is why if you're going to think that you're going to become, you think, oh, I'm a YouTuber, therefore I'm a press person because I have media influence and I go out there with my cell phone and start filming stuff. If you're not trained, if you don't have safety, protection, that sort of thing, you might find yourself in big trouble, even if you've done nothing wrong. That's the problem, is that you sit there, but I have the right to do this. Yes, that's true. You have the right. However, you're also putting yourself into danger. I'm not excusing the danger. I'm just saying that's one of the risks. And I would encourage people who think they want to try to be press to go out and get the training, get the support, get the backup, and participate with people who know what they're doing rather than to try to do it yourself. Because this is fairly serious business going on. And if you have the president threatening to, even illegally or not, bring in the military, bring in much more heavy forces. Watch out. Also, one thing I also want to mention that someone else mentioned here, when you hear reports of saying, well, the military is called out, I understand that one thing that's happened recently in recent years is that local law enforcement has been militarized. By that meaning local law enforcement no longer has a squad car and the police officer with their standard gear. Local office has been issued lots of fairly serious military gear. And so sometimes it's hard to see the difference between a special tactics, special weapons force that's police and the military. They often look the same. One reason why is that sometimes what the federal government does when they want to sort of upgrade issues is they sell or give hand-me-down equipment to other state and local officials. So you could see things that look military. You may even say, I've heard people say, I'm in the military and I recognize it happening. That's the military. It can also be that essentially it's surplus has been sold and bought by the local police officers, and they're using military-like equipment, even though they're not military. This has been one of the things that people have been concerned about is the militarization of police. In that regard.
Well, yeah, and I think there is now some calls to repeal allowing the military to sell former, their equipment to police departments, because that's, the thought that that's how you're getting the militarization of police.
Yes.
So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to show a footage. What we're hearing is, and this is bizarre. Now we did see yesterday a whole sort of cadre of police officers going down was clearly a residential neighborhood. There were no protesters. There was nothing that anyone could see wrong, and there was a family standing on their porch recording and watching what was happening. They were on their property. They were just watching the police officers, and the police officers got about halfway up the street. They stopped, they turned, and they opened fire with paint canisters and I forget whether it was a gas canister too, but certainly paint canisters that you could see paint just splattering and hitting the people, hitting the house, and everything going. And they had to retreat indoors. And it was sort of like, why are the officers there? Why are they shooting at civilians? I think this does go at least to some of the confusion. But what we're hearing now is that police are entering private residences and without warrants, without any. Now, if you've got probable cause, in some cases you don't need a warrant, but there appears to be teams of police officers that have been breaking into residences, either where they suspect there are people are. So I don't know. It's a little hard to discern what's going on, but we have footage of what we're being told is happening. And this reminds me too that we did see last night, and we had footage last night of several triage tents that were destroyed by police officers, and one or two. There was a person. He had on a Red Cross helmet. He was in the midst of administering first aid when he was received several baton blows to the head, to the back, and then once he was on the ground. He identified himself as a medic, and they continued to assault him until the video cut out. But what we're going to show you now is what we've been hearing about police in D.C. And this is a very chaotic scene. I don't know if anyone's going to be able to make heads or tails of this, but let's see what we've got.
And then I have some comments. So let's see the scene first.
Oh, and the audio, I apologize, the audio. And then we also have another helicopter scene.
They're going inside someone's home? No.
All right, so what we're seeing...
They're going inside someone's home?
So...
No.
So here's what we appear to be seeing is officers going door to door and going into the homes and looking for people. We see a mass of police officers, but also rioters, it looks like, with them going door to door and going into homes. There's a whole bunch of masked people with the police officers, and they're basically going door to door. This is somebody who's recording this happening to his neighbor. and then sees the police go in. The police appear to break the door down to the neighbor, and then rioters and police all appear to be going into the house, and then they come down towards this man's house, and he's shouting, "No, no, no," and it does look like the police don't break into his house, but the footage cuts out after that, so we don't really know what's going on. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to just bring in the footage of the chopper in addition, and that's going to be coming in the profile view below me. This is what appears to be an Apache helicopter, not a civilian helicopter, military, flying overhead in D.C. So we got a lot going on. What was it you wanted to say?
I mean, again, I don't. When I'm talking about the problems, I'm doing so trying to give you information rather than to justify or rationalize one side or the other. I think it's better to be informed than it is to just go with the thing. Now, again, the stuff you're showing is something that I think is horrible, and certainly the situation I'm sure with the case of that neighbor might be that there will be all kinds of protracted lawsuits and other sorts of things happening as a result of that. We don't know what the cause was, but when the police enter on what they claim to be probable cause, it does not give them the license to then let anyone else in to go in and loot the place. And they're actually required law to secure the place before leaving. But obviously it appeared that wasn't what we were seeing. One thing to understand is that right now with social media, law enforcement is actively monitoring social media. In fact, social media sites are actively providing law enforcement with public feeds. Nothing special, but public feeds. So if you're so dumb as to go on to a public forum, even if you think you got some sock account, and start to talk about, hey, let's go down and cause trouble, or I'm going to go out there and film what's going on for trouble, and you think you're being anonymous, guess again, well-trained press understand how to do it safely, how to do it without revealing their sources. Most likely you don't. And so if you're in a house and one of your kids is on some social media stuff, instigating stuff, you could be a situation where they have probable cause to come in and cause trouble. Now's not the time to instigate or to threaten or to be in a mode where you have the appearance of participating in illegal acts. I would highly encourage you to avoid inflammatory language online. It's not anonymous, and that can, and in some cases, will be used against you.
All right. So one thing I'd like to do too, we're just having some issues with our Discord, and I want to be clear about this. We've dropped. There apparently seems to be in Perth, Australia, there are a large number of protesters, and we have footage of it. It is the official position of In Time, so long as Landon is here, that all of those footage is fake, and we just do this as a courtesy to our guests. We try to be understanding of their particular proclivities, and so just as while he is here, we deny the existence of Australia just as a courtesy.
In fact, maybe that people are protesting the existence or the non-existence of Australia. I'm not sure. The other thing, of course, is as I like to say to my alleged Australian friends.
Alleged.
I always say alleged is don't stomp the ground too much because they're sealing they can hear it. So,
and for people who don't know the inside joke, and it's actually always just a little interesting having you on, because we're going rogue when we have on Landon Knoll, banned for life from YouTube for claiming Australia doesn't exist in a joke.
As a joke. Because the joke might have been considered offensive to some Australians, not that the people who did so were Australians, and not that the Australians that laughed at my joke weren't offended. But there you go. But back again, and I don't want to curtail your rights of free expression, but understand, if you are out there with a cell phone and you are coordinating with people about action happening and making statements about stuff that someone could construe as being instigation, right? You say Trump this or anti-Trump this and screw this person. You start to give rhetoric which someone might even infer as being part of the problem. You can become a target. Remember that even if you're using something like, if you say, well, I'm using some Snapchat because it's encrypted, or I'm using a Tor browser. If you don't know what you're doing, you may not understand that your local ISP knows where you are, because that's how the stuff gets delivered. Most of the time, people who use that stuff do it incompetently. If you're not a competent cryptographer, you're not a competent security expert, if you've not been trained by people like EFF on how to give press information in secure, anonymous fashion, chances are you're going to make a mistake. When they're having these things of civil unrest, particularly today, the law enforcement is making heavy use of stuff. So in this local area where I'm in, the city next door has a shopping district where the police heavily went in and prevented, at least as of last night, looting. That potential trouble was determined by law enforcement finding chatter. They call chatter, which means it wasn't that they're hearing people whispering, it's online stuff. So my suggestion to you is to be careful and instead think about how to de-escalate things rather than to get mad. I know people are mad. I know that there's a whole lot of frustration. We have people that are mad and upset and angry about the how society is treating its members. We have people who are mad and upset about the political situation, mad and upset about and concerned about the pandemic. Very understandable. I understand that the tensions are on high alert, and law enforcement is also human. They make mistakes. If you're the target of the mistake, it still hurts, even if it's a mistake. So I'm trying to appeal to be a little bit selective about what you're saying. That being said, I think it is still quite fair to criticize the federal response or the state response or local response in a peaceful manner. Not in the middle of a curfew, in the middle of a riot. That's probably not the best time to try to enforce your right to petition for redress.
All right, so what I'm going to do, another rundown here, and we'll try to see sort of where we stand. We do know that Baltimore has activated the Maryland State Police and National Guard. There is looting across New York, and in Dallas we have in New York, it appears, so Los Angeles, Oakland was hit pretty hard yesterday. Los Angeles apparently was hit pretty hard yesterday, and there's a number of violations to curfew. So the rundown is as follows. Mr. Floyd was killed 7 days ago by 4 police officers. 2 had him pinned down. 1 had his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck. The last official report I heard, and this has been modified some, but the last official report I heard was his knee was on his neck for 8 minutes. Mr. Floyd became unresponsive. He kept his knee on Mr. Floyd's neck for another 11 minutes on top of that. The ambulance was called. He was taken to the hospital where he was pronounced dead. Since then, there were riots that night, or not riots, there were protests that night in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It expanded the next night to 4 cities, then to 30 cities, and is now in roughly about 120 cities having protests, but rioting going on in an unknown number of those cities. 40 cities have, over 40 have imposed curfews. More than 24 states now have deployed the National Guard. The National Guard and military has been deployed to Washington, D.C. The preliminary autopsy and died as a result of overall stress, and that his airway had not been obstructed either from blunt force to the neck or through pressure on his back or chest. However, a private autopsy conducted, the report concluded about 12 hours ago that in fact it was compression from both on the neck and on the chest that caused him to die, and did in fact say that this was a homicide, the result of being restrained, and which resulted in not just restrained, but the compression on the chest and neck, which resulted in cardiopulmonary arrest. 3 hours later, the final draft of the Hennepin County Medical Examiner came out and appeared to reverse the original draft position, and they did in fact conclude that his death was a homicide. We have now had at least 12 countries and numerous other cities, France, Germany, in the UK, the Netherlands, Canada, Ireland, Australia, I forgot to knock that off the list. Have
allegedly. You just
Brazil,
say allegedly.
Yeah, allegedly Australia. They're not allegedly happening in Australia. They're happening in what is allegedly to be Australia, and then it's an important distinction. And we have been showing footage of a great many of those, but there's more coming in. All of those appear to have been peaceful, and it is showing a world increasingly united with a disenfranchised portion of the U.S. population. Donald Trump has said that he is expecting governors will act swiftly and decisively. He has used some pretty aggressive language in saying that the key word is dominate. If you don't dominate your city and your state, people will walk all over you. You have to dominate. You have to. So he's been talking up the rhetoric. He's also said the military will come in with heavy weapons. I don't think he knows what that means, but at any rate, he has, in a conversation recorded with multiple governors today, he told them that they were all too weak and that most of what was going on was their fault. He reminded them of what happened with Occupy Wall Street, where they were knocked over like bowling pins. Quote, "One day you say enough, and that's what happened. People went in and wiped them out," which is not what happened, but nonetheless. So what we are seeing now is actually, so far, not very different from what we've had over the last couple of days. Yesterday got very tense when it looks like there was a fire set to ostensibly the Northwest Guard Tower, not Guard Tower, sorry, Gate. Just inside the gate on the White House. It was put out rapidly, but there were multiple fires just outside of Pennsylvania Avenue, and the church across it was burned. And so Trump now appears to be taking very seriously stopping the rioting in D.C. We've now shown some footage of what appears to be police officers going door to door, bursting into residents and coming in with a large number of looters behind them. We don't know what the goal is. We don't know what they're trying to do, but we've heard reports of this, and we've seen some footage now that purports to be that. Certainly does look like that. And we have what appears to be a large number of Apache helicopters buzzing the crowds, and a number of deployments of gas and flashbangs in the area, which has really become, that's not really breaking news so much anymore. We've been seeing that pretty much every day. But what we're hearing is a lot of protesters are being arrested in California right now, Los Angeles, Oakland, and New York, all in violation of the curfew. A number of these cities have extended their curfews either through Tuesday or all the way through the rest of the week. People are being asked to not come into work, and some of these towns are now going into lockdown with the businesses closing once again. Which does bring me to another interesting point. We don't have to get an answer to that right now, but what is this going to do to the COVID numbers? We are seeing a spike already in D.C. COVID cases have spiked in D.C. Yeah. I'm anticipating one in Michigan as a result of the dam breaking and thousands of people being put into shelters. 3 dams broke in D.C. Almost 2 weeks ago. And we have not yet seen a spike in the numbers, but I do anticipate it. So what are we looking at?
I mean, I think the best estimate for exposure to impact on the numbers is a period of 2 weeks. So one might think that these protests and the infections that are occurring because of these protests, we will see the result in the numbers show up 2 weeks, assuming the numbers are being accurately reported and accounted. But one hopes that it's so it's a delayed reaction, which is part of the problem. In terms of giving people resources, I want to give you an example of something you might want to think if you choose to be out there recording. Here, for example, is a thing. This is a particular thing done by the by the ACLU. There are apps by the ACLU called Mobile Justice that helps you record. In fact, part of the thing is what they're doing is that the recordings you have on your phone are being instantly uploaded to the internet. One of the things that people find sometimes is law enforcement, when they choose to decide that they don't want your reporting, you don't want your recording of what they've just done, is they will seize your phone and an accident will happen to it, and they'll sit there and say, well, it was a riot, who knows what happened to it, right? Yeah. So there are things, and you'll find that there will be, it'll say things like, ACLU Mobile Justice, it looks sort of like this here on App Store, and they have Android and iOS. And what these are doing is recording they're recording and uploading simultaneously, so that even if they come and seize your phone, there's essentially it's already out of their hands and you can access stuff. So that's something. Look up ACLU Mobile Justice app.
Okay, so just so I understand correctly, you are both telling people not to go out and do this, and you're telling them how to find the app.
Well, I'm telling people don't put yourselves in harm's way, but on the other hand, if you are peaceably assembling, and you are in a case where there's not curfew or it's during the middle of the day, and you want to record what's happening, and you think something is a particular problem, using this app and uploading stuff is a good way to make sure that coverage is actually recorded, because having it on your local app or local phone and having the phone damaged or taken away doesn't do you any good.
Yeah. All right.
Also, I would also say that if you're in a situation where you could be arrested, be sure that people know where you are, where you're going, when you're expected to be back. Be sure that you actually have legal counsel on hand to assist you. You do not want to be in a position where you say, "Oh, I need to have a lawyer." That's not, being in jail during a mass incarceration is not the time to try to find a lawyer.
That's a good point. All right, so we've got a super chat here. We've got so let me just deal with this, and I believe actually your camera, I don't know if that's you or me, your camera does appear to have frozen. Let me try refreshing this for a second. Yeah, I'm going to refresh you here. Oh, and hopefully we don't cut out or lose. Oh, there you go. You're moving again. All right. All right.
So I'm trying. If you're going to do it, be safe, be wise. I can tell you that when a organization like a major news media organization sends a crew out, they have people who are with them, who are spotters, looking for trouble, and trying to advise the crew, hey, we need to go now, right? There's somebody within the group that has a call to say, we're moving now, right? Because you may be interviewing somebody and the police announce order to evacuate, order to leave the area. You have to have somebody on your group saying, it is now time. We're going to stop the conversation and we're going to leave now. We're going to go this way, or they're shooting, or whatever. You need a spotter. You need a safety person. You also need to have communication with a base where they know where you are. You need to have legal counsel available if you get into legal trouble. You need to have medical assistance. You need to have ability to handle cases where you get tear gassed or worse. It's a dangerous situation, and if you don't know what you're doing, it can be fatal.
All right.
I'm not excusing it.
No.
I try to be blunt.
I think it's important that people know. So thank you, and I do think we actually have a number of people who have been involved in and have been watching and seeing or even participating in the protests. So I think you're talking to the right crowd. Jake, 4D, Fourth Dimensional Jake, for $5 super chat. Thank you very much, Jake. We really do appreciate those super chats. So thank you. Just left the protest in Tacoma, Washington. We walked up and down for hours. I had a walking interview with the mayor of Tacoma. He did what? But I can't get the mayor of Tacoma. I think he's going for my job. I think he's going for your job. I think we may have a new guest host. But okay, plus 2 council members. So, well, that's good. And I think, the number of cities, and we've mentioned this before, and I think this bears repeating, which is there's a very large number. If right now, my guesstimate for the cities that we really know that there's rioting in is about 20 to 30. But the number of cities in which there are peaceful protests is up as high as 120.
Many. Yes,
so,
many.
Yeah.
Most protests, I think, are peaceful. Most people out there are protesting. This is one of the problems with the so-called 24-hour news cycle. It is an insidious industry designed to take you, the product, and deliver you to the advertiser. And so they have these footages that they go over and over again to get you all hyped up and so forth, and get you on the news, trying to hear the next thing happening and supplying advertising it to you. My recommendation: turn off your television. Turn off your television. Stop watching it because you're not, and instead pay attention to local emergency situations if you're in a situation where it's under an unrest, and pay attention to competent online sources. The by and large, the media treats you as a product delivering you to advertisers. They're not helping the situation. Turn off your TV. Turn off that CNN. Turn off that Fox. Turn off that MSNBC. Turn off all those things. It's not doing you any good. It's not informing you. You know the current situation. If you want to be concerned, there are ways you can find out what your local situation is and how to stay safe. Those media outlets that are out there, legally press stuff, are not doing you any good. They're not helping. They're not even intending to help. It used to be that most of the press was out there to try and inform the public. Now they're merely trying to entertain you enough to hold you on. They pump advertising to you. Sorry to say, but that's
okay. So, hold on. Let's clarify. Let's make a lot of clarifications and caveats here. There's nuance. Okay. So now he said online sources. He did say reputable online sources, but he said online sources nonetheless. So, I think so there's Interesting Truth has questions. Turn off in time? ? No, let's not get crazy. No, I know. We're all scared. I know we're
And I did not suggest that, by the way.
It's a very stressful time, and I get it, but just don't panic, dude, and just keep, in time is good for you.
Yeah, reputable. I said reputable.
He said reputable. Well, yeah, but even though he said reputable, I think in time could be a fair exception. I think you should keep in time on anyway. But, So I don't. I've never even met this man. I don't know.
But the
how
local
he's
news
being broadcast.
Generally, the local news tends to be more topical about what's happening in your area, and there also are in the case like our county, there are emergency alerts going out if you need to be shelter in place, that sort of thing. Those are stuff there. But I'm talking about the national news, these so-called fake news that the president has, and so that's one of ours. I have a later on rant regarding one of my employees that are in the federal government, but I wanted to at least say I don't think that the news industry is in a very good state right now. Sad to say.
So we've had some reports of this too, of police officers obfuscating their badges, and we've just gotten a report of Arizona police that have appeared to have wooden batons and masks, and their faces are covered. You can't actually even see the faces because they've got the full covering, and they don't have badges or any identification. So I'm curious to know. I mean, it's okay, and this is actually there's kettling is what you're seeing right now. This is where protesters have been. You can see they're firing on the protesters. The protesters can't go anywhere in this footage that you see right here. What it was they were up against an embankment that goes up into a wall. They were completely pressed up against it, and they were being pushed into it further by tear gas that was being deployed against them. They couldn't go the other direction because they'd be going into the fire, and instead we're trying to get away. So that was an example of kettling, and it looks like that may have been also what happened last night. Those are
those dangerous crowd situations you can have. My employee who occupies the White House has been behaving, I think, in the most unpresidential manner. His use of incendiary language, particularly to preach to his choir, I think is unacceptable. His commentary even to the governors is disgusting. His lack of consideration for his oath of office and for the rule of law is appalling. Unfortunately, we had an impeachment and a Senate that seems to accuse him of anything, right? If I were on the House floor, I would be screaming for articles of impeachment. I think his comments about when looting starts or shooting starts, is unacceptable in the extreme. And I would constitute that as sufficient grounds for impeachment, but there's no way you get that out through the Senate. So in part, I blame the Senate as a body and its majority for enabling and emboldening Trump in his behavior. Right now is not the time to sit there and pour gasoline on the fire saying, stop burning. And that's what Trump is doing. His behavior is unacceptable, and I am, other than petition redress the grievances and working the right thing, I don't quite know what to do right now. However, we have an opportunity to change that come the general election, when you have the opportunity to vote for electors. And perhaps you could keep this in mind for those that are eligible citizens to register to vote, because most of you aren't registered to vote, and then actually voting, because guess what? The last election produces this situation. If you don't like the situation, change it. Again, why did Trump decide to single out, but I'm going to protect the Second Amendment, when he missed the First Amendment? He didn't sit there and say, I'm going to protect your First Amendment. He said, I'm going to protect your Second Amendment. Why did he do that? Not because he cares about guns, but because he cares about the people he thinks will cheer him on and vote for him. And that is absolutely unacceptable behavior in this situation. What you need from a national leader is someone who's trying to calm rather than someone who's trying to force. You can be resolute, you can be firm, but you don't sit there and pour fuel on the fire and then say, but you're burning, so stop burning or we're going to bring in the military and dominate you. Unacceptable behavior on my employee's part. And I will write him a letter and let him know that I think his behavior is as my employee is unacceptable and he needs to change.
All right, so a couple more questions. We've been asking a terribly unfair question that we ask basically everybody who's been on the show in this, which is, where do you see, do you think, the next 24, 48 hours headed, given sort of what we know, sort of how this is blossoming internationally, what is happening, and we're getting in some reports. I'm going to stay on this. We've been getting a number of different reports from Arizona. It looks like there's a few things happening there, so I want to stay on it. And I think the people have been providing us with that, so we'll stay on that, and we will catch up with the super chat in 1 second. So, well, actually, let me do the super chat real quick, and then I'll finish with that question. So, Fourth Dimensional Jake, $5. Again, thank you very much, Jake. We sincerely appreciate your support. Last night, police barricaded protesters in at 4:30 in preparation for the 5 p.m. curfew. They also pepper sprayed them, including a small girl. And we did have a picture of that, and we were able to confirm later that was I think it was an 8-year-old girl who, actually, maybe speaking a different incident. The video that we had yesterday was a woman holding her 8-year-old daughter. The daughter did have a sort of COVID mask on, but that was it. A police officer went right up to her, didn't hit the parents, didn't hit anybody, sprayed her right in the eyes, and then vanished. The officer just... So, I think there's thoughts. So where do you see this headed, Landon, in the near future, do you think?
Well, I think one of the things you're going to see is more international response and sympathetic protests and other things. I think you're going to see a rising tide of people who are mad, scared, angry, upset, and lashing out. I think when I read Trump is that I think he's going to try and be seen as being strong. He has been extraordinarily incompetent in dealing with the pandemic. He knows he's in trouble with his electorate, and so he sees this as an opportunity to establish law and order dominance thing, right? And so I think he has every intention of trying to push the appearance of him doing something. Now, I understand, he doesn't have to do something, he just has to appear to do something, appear to be tough. And that may also have a portent, if that works and he's allowed to get away with it, you may see that as part of his election campaign. So I think that the list of places in curfew will grow. I think that the incidence of really bad behavior on part of protesters and part of law enforcement is going to continue to grow. Both sides are going to irritate each other even more. And I think in 48 hours, we're going to see potentially Trump attempting to flex his political muscles, preach to his choir, and target places that are not in his camp. So I suspect that he might be more apt to target, let's say, the states of California and New York, than he might target Oklahoma and South Carolina. Just a guess. That's my prognosis. I think there's going to be some legal challenges to his attempts, and we'll see what the courts do.
So we have Robert Reich, who is a former Secretary of Labor under Bill Clinton. He is an economist, a political commentator. He's actually served Gerald Ford, Carter, and Clinton. He does a lot of great work. I thought he did a spectacular video on gerrymandering, in particular. But he also explained
an excellent gentleman to listen to.
Yep, very good. He has now just tweeted, as of literally just 12 minutes ago, quote, "Where is Congress? Where is the Supreme Court? Where are the mayors and governors, living former presidents? Where are the university presidents, foundation heads, religious leaders, corporate leaders, union heads, editors, and publishers? All must stand up to Trump's madness."
Yes, I think that I don't know, isn't Congress not in session at the moment, but they could certainly start speaking out locally.
A number have, and some have been at the protests, and a few have been a few like I think there was 2 or 3 congresswomen who were protesting and got pepper sprayed. There was a lot. There's been local ones. Oh, this is actually City Hall in Nashville, Tennessee, that's on fire. You can see right there. But we can get into that. There have been some, and so far it's been a tepid. What we're understanding is that there are 2 camps right now in the Trump administration. One saying he has to press harder on the gas. The other one saying he has to back way off. The one saying he has to back way off and he has to try to show leadership. That one is by far the majority opinion, but it appears not to be the one he's listening to. But as I understand it, so far, everything from members of Congress has either been suggesting that he's handling this poorly or staying quiet. There haven't been any significant.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is that there are people in the administration that realize that this may be bad for his reelection, and that nothing good can come out of this, and that he should back off. And other people, again, not because he should be showing leadership, but because he think he can't win in this. There's other people that say, let's do the tough law enforcement, law and order sort of thing, and it'll depend upon whether or not who wins. Right now, the get tough people seem to be winning, or at least the president's siding with them. Whether that accomplishes his goal politically is to remain to be seen. If he thinks he gained something by this, he will continue to push the law and order thing, as opposed to stuff. He's got to be tough and rebuild the economy and that sort of thing. But I think that this is more a matter of saying that our country has a very significant illness. We've had problems in our country for a long time. These problems are not being addressed. Fighting protesters is merely fighting the symptom. It is not curing the problem. Protesting and looting is also exacerbating the symptom. It's not solving the problem. Law enforcement that's trying to do its job, but in a whole number of times is not doing it effectively, is also part of the problem. We have this national illness, and we don't have somebody at the helm showing leadership to try to resolve it. They only think, and that's a part of it. Again, I have a criticism of my employee. He mostly thinks about himself. And I think it's part of his what appears to be narcissistic tendency. He thinks about, what is this going to get me? And so his predicting his behavior for the next 48 hours is going to be Trump thinking, what can I get out of this? And if he convinces himself that being heavy-handed doesn't buy him much, he won't do it. Not because it shouldn't, but because he won't get out of it. He's thinking, what will it? So you want to know what Trump's going to do? It's going to be him thinking, well, what do I get out of it? Do I gain anything or not? Now look at what the Democrats do politically, what Joe Biden does politically. That may also help determine what Trump does. But I think in the next 48 hours, we're going to see increased international protests. We're going to see increased domestic protests. At some point, the government does have the ability, by sheer force, to quell the disturbance. But long after it's burned through a lot of bridges, unfortunately. Is that a good prognostication?
No, I think it is. I think that's sort of roughly where I stand. I mean, I think obviously one thing that makes it very hard to predict, you start getting into chaos theory, and this is chaos. But obviously I'm equivocating the word, but nonetheless.
Sure.
The reality is the further out you try to predict, the harder it becomes, because any small change here changes things wildly. I think if there's our concern yesterday was what happens if any number of protesters makes it to the White House lawn. It's actually not that hard to do. College kids on hazing and pledge weeks often. The pledge is, they have to actually go to the White House lawn and try to make it to the Oval Office. I mean, it's insane, but you have 4 or 5 college kids jumping the fence and making a dash for, and there are snipers there who will kill you, and they've seen it happen enough that they're restrained, but it's a heavily fortified and defended building, and so I was concerned about what happens if 100 protesters get to the White House lawn. My suspicion is, it depends in part on whoever's in charge of the Secret Service that night, but my suspicion is they all open fire and kill as many of those protesters as possible, and you wake up in the morning with a lot of dead Americans on the lawn.
And I think the thing that would happen there, one of the reasons why there's been 2 times where they've moved the president to a safe location, is that the Secret Service determined that that there was a high risk of an attempt to rush the White House, and by announcing the president has left, they hope that might spare them from having to defend the White House. There's a lot more than just the president in the White House that they're bound to defend.
Yes.
It is a really bad idea to try to go to the White House uninvited.
yes. I think that's a good. That is a very. I like. That is the kind of understatement that I very much enjoy.
But again, I'm thinking, I would say, follow reputable sources. One of the best ways I would recommend you try to follow things is local news in your local town as to what's happening, including very times your county and your city have things where you can sign up for emergency alerts if you need to be alerted. And then look at international news as they report. Look at a spattering of international news as reporting what's going on in the U.S. For brief periods of time. You do not need to watch the same videos over and over again for hours and hours and hours on end. That does not do you any good, does not do the country any good, does not do the situation any good. Vote. And if you're eligible to vote and you haven't registered, register. Register and then vote. Remember what's happening. It's you, the potential voter or the registered voter, have the power to make changes. And if you don't, it's your fault.
Actually, to answer a question too, because you just got me thinking about that. So somebody was asking, the news sources I most often rely on are The Guardian, the Reuters, AP, Al Jazeera. Believe it or not, Al Jazeera is definitely trying to build itself to compete, and they are a good news organization. They do have a bias, you can tell, but they report facts accurately. They report facts very accurately, very well, and they're fast. I also like PBS and or NPR. That's usually, those are the ones I like. If I'm in a rush, I'll hit CNN. Boy, do I avoid MSNBC.
But I would say I would look at Canadian Broadcasting Company, look at Australian Broadcasting Company. That's not US ABC, but Australian ABC. Look at the BBC as examples of foreign stuff. Not that anyone they have their biases, but triangulate. And then limit your looking to maybe 30 minutes to an hour. Don't be on don't be hyperventilating Because if you're hyperventilating on that 24-hour news cycle, you are also part of the problem. You're not part of the solution. Contact your local officials. Let them know what you think. Register and vote. Those are the long-term things. In the meantime, stay safe. I would highly recommend, if you're under a curfew, to not violate the curfew. And stay safe.
Fourth Dimensional Jake, $2. Thank you again, Jake. Thank you very much. Can't vote, too young, felony, etc. Speak up and be heard. And absolutely, and we should also have you on at some point. There you go. There's another topic that we need to do. Landon Knoll, for those of you who don't know, is now part of a at least once a month. Maybe we'll move to twice a month at some point, but certainly at a minimum once a month series we're going to be doing regularly on Thursdays. On American civics. We've already had our first part of this on the Constitution. We're going to have more, but I think one thing we should add to that is the restrictions, the common restrictions against ex-cons voting, and how and why and what that.
There are people who can't vote because they're not citizens, because they've had their voting removed because of their status. They've been knocked off the voter rolls, other sorts of things. That said, I am referring to those who are eligible to vote, who could register to vote or register to vote and voting, because that's going to be long term. If what you're seeing makes you mad, don't get even, vote. Please obey curfews. If you must protest, do so peacefully. Do it in the middle of the day. Here's another area. Here's a good tip for maintaining safety. 2 hours after sunrise to 2 hours before sunset is a time where it's relatively safe to be out. The period of time between, let's say, 2 hours before sunset and night is when trouble happens. There's also that's when curfews in a number of cases come about. If you have to do it safely, your business in terms of critical activities like shopping or so forth, do that in the middle of the day, even though it may be warm where you are and it's hot. But to treat the time, and law enforcement as well is very, very active. Then that 2 hours before it starts to get dark, before the sun sets, because that's when people begin to plan their trouble, and law enforcement is moving into place to try and prevent it. So if you're out and about minding your business, treat 2 hours after sunrise to 2 hours before sunset as your time for operations. When you go out, let someone know where you are, have communication, and when you're expected back. Be sure you're back in your home, safe, 2 hours before sunset. And you can maximize your ability to not get into trouble.
All right. I think that's very good advice. So here's what I want to do. We're still looking at, I think we're actually going to maybe be looking at winding down, which will be nice. It's only 3 hours in. It's going to be an early night. But right now, it doesn't look like things are particularly worse than yesterday, which is good. Obviously, everybody's been concerned about the military presence in D.C. We don't have any reports of anything. I mean, we've shown some of that footage of which we don't understand, the police going into the houses. But I mean, right now there doesn't seem to be anything extraordinary out of what's been happening over the last 6 days happening. So we may start to wind it down. I'll probably do another rundown for people who are just joining us so that they understand what we've been seeing over the last 6 days and what we've been seeing tonight. We do have, we have a news sharing section on our Discord. Anyone who wants to come join us on our Discord. We also often have discussions in the voice lounge. I'm often there. Tonight, I'm probably going to try to get some sleep. I've been doing about 2 hours of sleep a night for the last couple of days. So I'm going to want to try to catch up on some sleep, and because it's been a lot of reporting. Yesterday we went all the way until about 4 or 5 a.m. So, but what we are seeing is, just to let you know, if you do go into the Discord, there's a lot of footage of various things. But some of the interesting things that we're seeing is there was one, and I'm tempted to put it up because we've been showing the other side, and I think to be balanced, we have to show both sides of this. But there was a protester who appears to have run his car into a bunch of New York officers. It looks like they're okay, but we do have that. But the amount of time it's going to take right now to get in. All right, we do, and there's footage of a lot heavier presence. There's also some footage. There appears to be in Arizona a white nationalist group which is I think the other concern I've been having, which is what happens when counter-protest groups, especially white nationalists, start coming out. And we have seen some of that with individuals. We saw 3 nights ago a man with a compound bow and using the broadhead tips on his bow was just shooting protesters. A man with swords came out and started engaging protesters. One a guy in a Bronco pulled up and started shooting into a crowd in Detroit, killed a 19-year-old boy. So we've had individuals doing this. We're probably going to start to have groups doing this reasonably soon. It looks like there's some preparing. We saw them preparing yesterday, but we didn't have any reports of anyone actually doing it. So, what are your thoughts? I mean,
I can't imagine Trump is going to let the opportunity pass by for him to appear to be tough. I think that's just something that thrills him disgustingly. And I think that he's going to look for any way he can in order to try and show that you need him to be tough. I think the only hope is that there are other people in the White House saying, so he's tough, what does he gain out of that? What he might get a momentary thrill, but what does he gain out of that in the long term? That may be part of the reason why people are trying to suggest he temper his words, but I don't think that's where he's headed. We'll see what the courts do, and we'll see how things progress.
Well, that certainly does not appear.
What do you think? What do you think,
strong
Nick?
suit. Well, no, I think I think I've gotten sort of a little derailed from the. I think if there's any major violence from the military, National Guard, or police against, and there's been some, absolutely, but I mean, as long as it's sort of what you would expect under normal riot conditions, I think if he deploys the military and if they engage in a meaningful way where there's a significant loss of life, and by what I mean by that is 5 or 10 people even at a specific site, it's not just these individual injuries and people are running and you see some blood and maybe somebody's killed, but I mean 5 or 6 people killed, the riots are fleeing, stuff like that. I think you're going to see a rebound effect. I think you're going to see a lot of this country get extraordinarily incensed. I think he's betting on the fact that he can intimidate people, and I think what's going to happen is I think he's going to get the exact opposite effect. I think he doesn't understand that.
I think you are right, because I think he thinks about what is he going to get out of it, not what will happen and what will people get out of it. He thinks about himself with his narcissistic style tendencies, and he doesn't think about consequences for other people. And the blowback that'll come from that is there. The thing I can hope is that if he tries to call in the military has a thing where they have to obey lawful orders. I would hope that if the military were asked to do something they regard as unlawful, they will refuse the order and they'll be in the right to do so.
And that is something that I think a lot of people don't understand, and you see the opposite of it. It's, you always follow orders and the commander in chief, but they are actually trained, and that is something that they are required to uphold the Constitution. They're required to follow the law. They still break it sometimes. That's not to say that, but they do have that out, and they are trained explicitly in the use of it. If they, especially against acts of genocide and breaking international law, they're actually prohibited from doing that.
And so we hope that this is a case. So, but you asked again. I think the next 48 hours, more curfews, more people attempting to provoke stuff, more cracking down by law enforcement. I understand also there's going to be more rumors. Where again, it's one of the reasons why you should not be glued to your Twitter feed. You should be not glued to your CNN, NBC, CBS, Fox, news cycle, but instead limit yourself to a half-hour of reliable sources, both domestic and foreign. And if you need to stay alert, oftentimes your county and your city have, for example, or you can sign up to get emergency alerts that if you need to be informed, you're going to be much better off learning about a local emergency that way than to see it on one of these, CNN-like news cycles. Try for your own mental health to not hyperventilate. Don't sit there hour after hour after hour after hour being fed the news cycle with very little variance. That doesn't do you any good. That doesn't have you. You're actually not part of the solution. You're actually part of the problem. Turn off your TV.
All right. Well, yep. But stay glued to absolutely.
But instead sample local stuff. You come onto your podcast, look at In Time, and see. Oh, he's put up something, and listen to it and gain the value of it. So subscribe. Click that bell.
Subscribe. Also, we have, we've been having roughly 60 people all night. So if you guys could do us a solid and hit like and subscribe, hit the thumbs up, that really does have an impact in our algorithm and how things work around here. So we also, you can become a Patreon and you can help contribute. We meet with our Patrons regularly and we talk about the show and talk about things we can do. They contribute and we really enjoy working with our patrons. We have a Discord, so again, for those of you who are not yet on our Discord, and we just have Mr. Fourth Dimensional Benedict Arnold. Jake just dropped an interview with the City of Tacoma Mayor Victoria Woodwards. So he did a walking interview with her, so that is in the news section of our Discord. Please go join that. And I think, so what we're looking at now, and this is sort of our final rundown on this, is about 120 cities in the U.S. are experiencing protests right now. There's violence in at least 20, maybe 30 of them. 30 at least are in a state of, over 40 have curfews, with 24 states now having deployed the National Guard, and Washington, D.C. Also, Washington, D.C. has definitely deployed some military forces. We've had helicopters buzzing crowds. We don't appear to have seen any uniformed military engaging in any way, although we do know that a number of protests have been broken up. They've been reported in most cases to have been peaceful. We also do know that the police appeared to be, we've shown some footage of this, breaking into residences and doing some kind of search. We don't know for what. But they've also been letting rioters and looters into the houses that they've been breaking into. At least that's what we've seen. We can't confirm that, but we did see footage of that. We've been hearing reports of it. Donald Trump has suggested that he will use the 213-year-old Insurrection Act to deploy the U.S. military across the United States to quell the riots, regardless of whether or not the governors want him to do that. We have heard so far an overwhelming number of governors say they do not want him doing that. He was on a phone call earlier today, which we played. It's very early on in the beginning. During that phone call, he told the governors that they were weak and that they needed to dominate. They needed to dominate their cities. They needed to dominate their states. And that he would be showing them something they had never seen before, and that he introduced them to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and said that he would now be in charge. He also spoke for about 6 minutes right outside. I think it was actually outside the White House. He then went for a photo op that has been now highly panned in front of the burnt-out church opposite the White House. But he has spoken and he has said that he is going to put a stop to this. He has said it is embarrassing to have these protests here, that the United States and in particular Minneapolis, Minnesota is being laughed at, and that he intends to stop it. We had an initial report yesterday from the county medical examiner for Hennepin County, which said that Mr. Floyd died of basically pre-existing medical conditions. A private autopsy revealed that he had that it was the man doing that autopsy ruled that it was a homicide, and said that he died as a result of chest and neck compression and being unable to breathe. 3 hours after that, the Hennepin Medical County Examiner's Office did, in fact, come out with a final report that had the same conclusion. Trump has labeled the protesters domestic terrorists. He has said he will make Antifa, he will put that onto the international terrorist list. There is a problem, which is, to the best of anyone's understanding, A, it's not a formal group, and so you can't grab their bank accounts. You can't do anything that list is intended for, really. And B, they are domestic, which means you can't put them. There's a whole bunch of problems, and I think we'll end up doing a stream on it. But
sure,
he's nonetheless said that. He has said that the protesters are terrorists, and he has said that they are engaged in crimes against humanity, crimes against the United States, and crimes against God. What you see here is a helicopter. yeah. He literally, I wish so. Yeah.
It's just as unacceptable behavior on the part of the President of the United States. It is just truly unacceptable. Of course, unacceptable behavior on the part of the rioters and looters too. But it's hard for me to tell the difference between the instigator and the doer at this stage. It's hard to tell who I have more contempt for. And the answer to Michael's question is yes, it does include long streams. Take them in short bursts, run them at higher speeds, and don't hyperventilate on them.
And we've had people who've needed to who've very graciously said we love the show, but wow, we need to take a break, and we highly encourage people to do that as needed. Yeah. It's a lot of very intense stuff. The other couple of things we do have now, even now as I'm talking, increasing reports of white supremacist groups across the country that are suggesting that they will do counter protests and or counter rioting. We also have a lot of sympathy protests across 12 countries at least, and a number of cities. We've been showing footage of them. You're about to see some footage coming up, but it's from Canada to the alleged country of Australia, to England, to Brazil, Italy, France, Germany. All have had sympathy protests, in some cases in the thousands. So we have the world's attention now, and it looks like, I think Trump is in a very precarious position. I don't think this is Paris, France that you're looking at right now. I don't think that Trump recognizes, I don't think he can see himself as a failure. When he introduced the general, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and said that he's never lost. Nobody who's ever won. I learned a piece of advice about lawyers. Never go with a lawyer who's never lost a case, because what that means is he's never tried a difficult case. He's only taken the easy ones. F. Lee Bailey is one of the greatest lawyers in American history, and he lost about 45% of the cases. He took 45%. He only won 55. And you sit there and say, well, gee, that's not very good. Yeah, but he took the cases nobody else could win. They couldn't be won, and he won more than half of them.
That's like saying that the doctors who take the most extreme medical cases and they get to save a quarter of them. It's not because they're incompetent, because they take on the cases that other people shy away from.
Yep. So the lawyer who's never lost a case is either lying to you, or he's never really tried a case. He's only taken,
or not that experience and hasn't taken enough cases.
And so a general that has never lost a battle, no such thing. No such thing. He's never fought a war. Then it's really what everybody's
And we
lost
don't.
battles.
And we don't know how many times that general face palmed himself.
So yeah, it's looking. I think at a minimum, actually, I'm very pleased. I think today, this evening was a lot easier going in. When we started our broadcast, we were looking at a president who was talking about engaging the Insurrection Act and appeared to be talking about mass deployments of the military. It appears that has not happened. There's only one confirmed deployment of the military, and they've been a nuisance to people, but primarily that we can tell, just a nuisance. Doorknob head, what if a general dies during his first battle? Never. Okay, you know what? Okay, no. Let's get. Okay, we're gonna. Okay, no. I'm the only one who gets to be smarmy and the like. I don't know. I don't like this at all. All right, this is New Zealand, by the way. This is a huge. That is thousands of protesters in New Zealand walking down the main drag there. So, yep. So, all right. I'll
be safe. Be part
Alex
of the solution, not part of the problem, and take care.
Yep. Thank you all for joining us, Landon. Thank you very much for joining us on such short notice. Your presence is always extremely helpful.
Thank you.
I think it's very good for our audience. Thank you to all the mods who have, as every night for the last week now almost, just done a spectacular job. So thank you to all of you who have been keeping up with us and the news in the Discord. And we will be seeing you tomorrow for Dr. Richard Carrier, his discussion on the influence of early Christianity on the development of science. And I have no doubt more coverage of these protests live tomorrow. In the meantime, please, everyone, do try to stay safe. Certainly take Landon's advice into account, and we will see you all tomorrow.